Every civilization has wrestled with the same unavoidable question. What happens when life ends? From the earliest myths carved into stone to the latest breakthroughs in neuroscience, human beings have searched for reassurance that death is not the final curtain. Traditionally, the answers have come from religion, spirituality, or philosophy. Heaven, reincarnation, and eternal return are all ideas designed to soften the harsh truth of mortality. Yet in the 20th century, physics began to whisper something different, something stranger than ancient myths and more unsettling than traditional religion. Out of the mathematics of quantum mechanics emerged the suggestion that death itself might be an illusion, that the conscious observer never truly experiences the end. This idea is not wrapped in mysticism or superstition. It comes from the equations that describe the smallest building blocks of the universe, the same framework that allows computers to function, that explains the chemistry of stars, and that predicts the behavior of particles with astonishing accuracy, also opens the door to a deeply personal implication. You, the conscious self, may persist through realities in ways that defy conventional logic. Scientists call this possibility quantum immortality, a theory that does not promise comfort or peace, but rather suggests that the act of observing the world locks you into an unending continuation. Before diving into the mechanics of this theory, it is important to understand that quantum immortality does not emerge from fringe speculation. Its roots lie in interpretations of established physics, particularly the many worlds framework of quantum mechanics. When these interpretations are taken seriously, a radical picture emerges. In every moment where death could occur, there also exists a version of reality in which survival continues. Since consciousness is always experienced subjectively, the observer would never perceive their own demise. Death would happen in countless universes, but never in the one you personally inhabit. The implications of this are staggering. It reshapes how we might think about risk, survival, and even the meaning of existence itself. To some, it sounds like a form of eternal life delivered not by gods, but by mathematics. To others, it is a nightmare scenario in which suffering and endurance stretch endlessly without release. Whether viewed as comforting or horrifying, the theory forces us to confront questions about identity, probability, and the nature of consciousness. With that foundation in place, we now move into the first chapter. Here, we will explore the strange notion at the heart of the theory and why it has managed to shock scientists and philosophers alike. To understand why quantum immortality captures attention, we must begin with the basic paradox. How can something as universal as death be called into question by science? After all, every culture, every generation, and every species on Earth has lived under the shadow of mortality. Biology makes it clear. Bodies deteriorate, cells break down, organs fail, and life eventually ends. But quantum mechanics does not speak in the language of certainty. It speaks in probabilities, superpositions, and wave functions. In that strange world, death is no longer a single, final event. It becomes one outcome among many. And as long as even one pathway preserves survival, there remains a version of you to experience it. Quantum immortality arises from this peculiar logic. Imagine that your life is a film reel, but instead of a single track of images, the reel splits into countless possible sequences every second. Some reels continue with you alive and unharmed, while others show you meeting your end. From the outside, a spectator might acknowledge that most reels terminate eventually, but from the inside, from your perspective as the protagonist, you would never witness the frame where the reel ends. Instead, your awareness would always find itself in the continuation, in the branch where survival occurs. This challenges one of our deepest assumptions, that death is an absolute boundary for consciousness. In everyday experience, we see others die and assume the same will happen to us. Yet consciousness is not like an external event. It is always a first-person phenomenon. You never experience being absent. You only ever experience being present. That subjective continuity is what quantum immortality exploits. If multiple outcomes exist, the observer is guaranteed to occupy the strand in which they remain conscious. For scientists, the strangeness of this conclusion lies in its roots. It is not invented fantasy, but a consequence of quantum mechanics taken seriously. The many worlds interpretation, proposed by physicist Hugh Everett in 1957, already suggests that reality splits at every quantum event, producing parallel universes. Most physicists treat this as an interpretation with no bearing on personal survival. Yet when philosophers and theoretical thinkers extend the logic, the conclusion seems unavoidable. If there is always some version of you that continues, then subjectively you never face death. This is not to say the theory is universally accepted. In fact, it is widely dismissed or ignored by mainstream physicists, partly because it strays into territory that feels philosophical rather than testable. Science demands experiments, and quantum immortality resists direct verification. Still, the mere possibility unsettles many. It blurs the line between physics and metaphysics, between mathematics and meaning. To philosophers, the implications are equally jarring. Classical philosophy has long debated the persistence of the self, whether consciousness can exist after death, whether the soul is immortal, whether identity can survive the passage of time. Quantum immortality adds a new twist to that ancient debate. It does not require a soul or divine intervention. Instead, it suggests that the mechanics of the universe themselves provide an endless stage upon which awareness continues. Death, in this view, is not a wall, but a branching pathway. What makes this theory particularly mysterious is its refusal to offer comfort in the traditional sense. It does not promise reunion with loved ones or eternal bliss. Instead, it posits a continuation that is fundamentally solitary. You may survive countless accidents, illnesses, or catastrophes, but those around you might not. In each branch where you live, others may vanish. The immortality here is not collective, but deeply personal and potentially isolating. This aspect troubles many who consider the theory. It suggests that survival could mean existing in improbable worlds, where suffering is extended beyond what seems bearable. You might live through accidents that should have been fatal, endure diseases that should have ended life, or find yourself in realities increasingly strange and improbable. The survival is real, but the cost may be unimaginable. Yet despite its unsettling implications, the mystery remains captivating. It forces us to confront the relationship between physics and experience, between probability and identity. If death is not an event we ever witness firsthand, then perhaps it is not an event we ever truly undergo. That possibility shakes the foundation of what it means to be alive. As we proceed, we will see how this mystery unfolds from the building blocks of quantum mechanics. We will examine the experiments, thought experiments, and interpretations that gave rise to the theory. We will also explore how this strange idea interacts with our deepest fears and hopes. Quantum immortality might not provide certainty, but it forces us to look at existence in a way that is both terrifying and awe-inspiring. In the 1930s, quantum mechanics was already challenging the most basic assumptions about how the world worked. Physicists had begun to accept that particles could exist in a superposition of states, that outcomes could not be predicted with certainty, but only described by probabilities, and that the act of measuring seemed to collapse all possibilities into one. While these ideas were mathematically precise, their implications were confusing, even to the people who discovered them. It was in this climate of uncertainty that Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger proposed one of the most enduring thought experiments in science, the paradox of Schrödinger's cat. Schrödinger's goal was not to celebrate the strangeness of quantum mechanics, but to expose what he considered absurd. He wanted to show that applying quantum principles to the macroscopic world, the everyday objects we see and touch led to conclusions that bordered on the ridiculous. To illustrate this, he imagined a cat locked inside a sealed box with a bizarre contraption. The setup was deceptively simple. Inside the box, along with the cat, was a vial of poison connected to a radioactive atom. The atom was unstable, and quantum physics described its decay as a matter of probability rather than certainty. In 1 hour, the atom might decay, releasing radiation that triggered the poison and killed the cat. Or it might not decay, leaving the cat alive. According to the mathematics of quantum mechanics, before the box was opened and observed, the atom existed in a superposition of both decayed and undecayed states. And since the cat's life was tied to the atom's condition, the cat too would be both alive and dead simultaneously, at least in theory. For Schrödinger, this was absurd enough to highlight the problem. In everyday experience, a cat is never both alive and dead. Something must be wrong with a framework that could suggest such a situation. His point was not to argue that the cat actually lived in 2 states, but to criticize the way quantum principles seem to scale up from particles to real-world objects. Yet, as often happens in science, what began as a criticism became a source of fascination. Instead of dismissing the paradox, later generations of physicists and philosophers embraced it as a way to explore the boundaries of quantum theory. The cat became more than a quirky example. It turned into a symbol for the strangeness of reality at the smallest scales. If the cat could exist in 2 states until observed, what did that imply about the role of measurement, the importance of observers, and the very nature of reality? Was the act of opening the box and looking inside truly what decided whether the cat was alive or dead? Or did the cat state exist all along, with our knowledge merely catching up? These questions would lead to decades of debate. Some physicists argued for a collapse of the wave function when measurement occurred. Others insisted that the wave function never collapsed at all, and that every possible outcome actually took place in a branching universe. It was from this line of thought that the many worlds interpretation eventually emerged, and with it the foundations of what we now call quantum immortality. The crucial detail lies in the way we interpret superposition. If the cat is both alive and dead before observation, then the universe must contain both possibilities. But if each possibility is realized in a separate branch of reality, then opening the box does not destroy one option in favor of another. Instead, it reveals which branch the observer has followed. In one universe, the cat is alive. In another, the cat is dead. Both outcomes exist, but no single observer experiences both at the same time. This framework set the stage for extending the logic to human consciousness. If a cat can be both alive and dead until observed, and if the universe can accommodate both outcomes, then what happens when a human being faces life and death probabilities? Just as the cat continues to exist in a world where it survives, so too might an observer always find themselves in the branch where survival occurs. What begins as a thought experiment about a trapped feline becomes a doorway into the disturbing possibility that consciousness cannot experience its own end. The paradox of Schrödinger's cat thus functions on multiple levels. On the surface, it illustrates the strangeness of applying quantum rules to everyday objects. On a deeper level, it raises questions about the role of observers in shaping reality, and when extended further, it provides a model for thinking about mortality itself. The cat's simultaneous life and death is not just a metaphor. It becomes a test case for how we might exist in a universe where all possibilities play out. Importantly, the paradox also underscores the limits of human intuition. We are accustomed to a world of certainty, where things either happen or they do not. Quantum mechanics insists that nature does not conform to this intuition. Instead, it operates according to probabilities that only become definite through observation. Schrödinger's cat was meant to dramatize this gap, to show how our everyday categories of alive and dead break down when applied to quantum systems. That very breakdown is what later thinkers seized upon when they began to speculate about immortality. It is also worth noting that the thought experiment does not describe a real laboratory procedure. No physicist ever locked a cat in a deadly quantum trap. The scenario exists purely in imagination. But it has been powerful enough to shape the direction of physics and philosophy for nearly a century. The cat remains an icon because it captures, in one vivid image, the profound strangeness of a universe governed by quantum laws. As strange as the cat scenario sounds, it is not unique in quantum physics. Similar superpositions exist in the behavior of electrons, photons, and other particles. Experiments have shown particles interfering with themselves as if they travel along multiple paths simultaneously. When extended to larger systems, the logic becomes more troubling, and Schrödinger's cat remains the most memorable expression of that unease. What makes the cat essential to the discussion of quantum immortality is that it introduces the idea of survival and death as simultaneous outcomes. In one universe, the animal perishes. In another, it lives. If reality can accommodate both, then the principle can be applied to human observers as well. It is not a large leap from saying the cat is both alive and dead to asking whether people are both mortal and immortal, depending on which branch of reality they occupy. By framing the paradox so clearly, Schrödinger opened a path that others would later expand. Without the cat, the idea of quantum immortality might not have taken root at all. The image of an animal trapped between life and death crystallized the central question. What does it mean to exist in a universe where all outcomes unfold? For those who take the many worlds interpretation seriously, the answer is unsettling but inevitable. Consciousness follows the path where awareness continues. Thus, Schrödinger's attempt to reveal absurdity instead planted the seed for one of the most radical theories about human survival. The cat's imagined fate became a mirror for our own, suggesting that the boundary we call death might be just another branch in the multiverse, one that our consciousness never enters. The paradox that began as a critique now serves as the foundation for the possibility that we never truly die. When Hugh Everett was a graduate student at Princeton in the 1950s, he was surrounded by the giants of quantum physics. The standard way of thinking about the microscopic world at that time was shaped by what's called the Copenhagen interpretation, championed by Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg. In their view, quantum mechanics described a system of probabilities that collapsed into a single definite outcome the moment an observation was made. The act of measurement was mysterious, but it seemed essential. Until the observer looked, the system was uncertain. Once observed, only one result remained. Everett believed this approach left too many unanswered questions. If the mathematics of quantum theory were to be taken seriously, then the wave function, the mathematical object describing all possible states, should never collapse at all. It should continue to evolve smoothly according to Schrödinger's equation. The problem was that if the wave function never collapsed, then all the possibilities it contained remained real. Instead of one outcome being chosen, every outcome occurred, each in its own separate universe. This was the radical core of what came to be known as the many worlds interpretation. In Everett's framework, reality is not a single thread, but a vast tree of branching possibilities. At every quantum event, where multiple outcomes are possible, the universe splits. In one branch, the particle lands here. In another, it lands there. Both branches exist simultaneously, though they no longer interact. The observer becomes entangled with the outcome, experiencing only one branch directly, while countless others unfold beyond their awareness. At first, this idea seemed too extravagant to take seriously. Colleagues dismissed Everett's thesis as a philosophical curiosity, rather than a scientific breakthrough. Bohr himself rejected it, insisting that physics should only concern itself with what can be measured. But Everett's vision had a certain elegance. It removed the need for mysterious collapses, avoided the vagueness of measurement, and treated the mathematics consistently across all scales. The cost of that elegance, however, was staggering. A reality composed of infinite universes with every possibility realized. Over time, the many worlds interpretation gained a foothold, particularly among physicists willing to entertain bold ideas. It offered a way to understand quantum mechanics without hidden variables or collapses, and it aligned with the equations as they were written. It also provided fertile ground for philosophical speculation. If every possible outcome occurs in some universe, what does that mean for identity, for decision-making, for the uniqueness of our lives? When extended to personal experience, the implications become profound. Imagine standing at a crossroads where your life depends on the flip of a coin. In one universe, the coin lands heads, and you survive. In another, it lands tails, and you do not. From the perspective of the many worlds interpretation, both universes are equally real, but from your perspective, you only experience one. And if the logic of quantum immortality is applied, you would always find yourself in the branch where survival continues. No matter how improbable that branch may be, the foundation for quantum immortality is thus built directly upon Everett's framework. Without the many worlds interpretation, the idea would collapse under the weight of probability. Traditional views of quantum mechanics would insist that eventually, death is the inevitable outcome. But in a multiverse where every possible branch exists, there is always at least one where you survive. And because consciousness is inherently subjective, you cannot experience the branches where awareness ends. Your continuity ensures that you follow the survival pathway. This does not mean the many worlds interpretation was designed to explain immortality. Everett himself never claimed such an implication. His goal was to resolve the puzzles of quantum mechanics with consistent mathematics. Not to suggest that human beings would live forever, yet theories often evolve in unexpected directions. Philosophers, scientists, and even science fiction writers took the seeds of Everett's idea and extended them, asking what it means if consciousness truly does persist across branching universes. One of the most compelling aspects of the many worlds interpretation is that it democratizes possibility. Every quantum event, no matter how small, spawns new realities. In one, you make a choice that changes your life. In another, you do not. In one, the accident happens. In another, you walk away unharmed. This web of universes is unimaginably vast, encompassing not only cosmic events, but also the smallest fluctuations in particles. The sheer scale of branching means that survival is not just possible, but guaranteed somewhere. And quantum immortality proposes that your awareness is always aligned with that guarantee. Critics argue that this interpretation is extravagant, multiplying universes beyond necessity. They claim it violates Occam's razor, the principle that theories should not introduce more entities than required. Yet defenders point out that the mathematics already allows for these universes. Denying them requires adding an extra rule about collapse, which is itself less elegant. In physics, elegance and consistency are often considered virtues, and Everett's theory remains appealing to those who prioritize them. The many worlds framework also avoids the problem of subjective specialness. In the Copenhagen view, observation seems to give humans or any measuring device an outsized role in determining reality. Many worlds, by contrast, treats observation as just another entanglement. Reality branches regardless of who is watching, and the observer is swept along with one outcome or another. This perspective may feel less anthropocentric, but it has the ironic effect of making human survival central to the quantum immortality discussion. To visualize this, imagine a tree with infinite branches sprouting in every direction. Each fork represents a quantum event. Your consciousness travels along one branch, but countless others continue with alternate versions of you. From the outside, the tree is whole, containing every possibility, From the inside, you only ever see one path. Quantum immortality suggests that your perspective always follows the path of survival, even if it means clinging to branches that become increasingly rare as time goes on. This explanation also clarifies why the theory is so unsettling. The many worlds interpretation implies not just survival, but endless survival. If there is always a branch where you continue, then you may never experience the cessation of consciousness. Death would occur in countless other branches, witnessed by countless other versions of people around you, but not in the one you occupy. This personal continuity may sound comforting at first, but it carries darker implications, as later chapters will explore. Everett's vision, once dismissed, has now become a cornerstone of modern debates about quantum mechanics. While not universally accepted, it remains one of the most serious contenders among interpretations, studied and discussed by physicists worldwide. For those exploring the boundaries of human existence, it provides the necessary framework to consider quantum immortality seriously. Without it, the theory would be little more than speculation. With it, the idea gains a foundation in one of the most mathematically consistent models of reality ever proposed. As we move forward, it is essential to remember that the many worlds interpretation is not just an abstract theory. It is a lens through which the universe looks radically different. Instead of a single, fragile thread of existence, it offers a tapestry of infinite threads, woven together in ways we can barely imagine. Somewhere in that tapestry, you are always alive, always continuing, always observing. That possibility is what transforms Everett's mathematical innovation into a theory of immortality unlike any other. From the very beginning of quantum theory, one of its strangest features has been the way observation seems to change reality. At the scale of everyday life, events appear definite. A coin lands on heads or tails, a glass falls and shatters or it doesn't. But in the quantum world, possibilities remain suspended until they are measured. Before observation, a particle's position, momentum, or spin is not fixed but spread out in a cloud of probabilities. Once a measurement is made, that cloud collapses into a single outcome. This peculiar dependence on measurement sparked what has been called the measurement problem. What counts as a measurement? Is it the involvement of a scientific instrument, the interaction with any macroscopic object, or is the decisive factor the conscious awareness of an observer? These questions cut to the core of physics because they touch on the role of the mind itself in shaping the physical world. For many scientists, the suggestion that consciousness could influence quantum outcomes was uncomfortable. Physics, after all, is supposed to describe objective reality, independent of human perception. Yet quantum mechanics seem to resist such separation. In experiment after experiment, the act of observing changed the results. The famous double-slit experiment illustrates this vividly. When particles like electrons or photons are sent through two slits without being measured, they behave like waves, interfering with themselves and producing a pattern that suggests each particle traveled through both slits simultaneously. But when detectors are placed to observe which slit the particle passes through, the interference pattern vanishes. The particle behaves like a localized object, choosing one slit or the other. Simply put, the outcome depends on whether it is observed. This strange dependence has led some to propose that consciousness is not just a bystander, but an active participant in reality's unfolding. In this view, the mind does not simply register events, it helps determine them. While many physicists resist this interpretation, preferring to think of measurement in terms of physical interactions, the puzzle remains unresolved, and it is here that the seeds of quantum immortality begin to take root. The argument goes like this. If consciousness plays any role in selecting outcomes, then it cannot experience the end of its own existence. By definition, awareness cannot be present in a state of non-awareness. From a first-person perspective, you will always find yourself in the branch of reality where you continue to observe. Even if countless versions of you perish in other universes, the you that remains conscious does not experience those endings. Survival becomes the only path you can ever personally follow. This creates what might be called the observer's dilemma. On the one hand, physics aims for objectivity, describing a universe that exists independently of observers. On the other, the subjective experience of observation cannot be denied. You never experience probabilities directly. You only experience outcomes, and your outcomes always include your own survival. Because if they didn't, there would be no observer left to register them. This dilemma unsettles both scientists and philosophers. For scientists, it suggests that consciousness may have a fundamental role in physics, something that resists reduction to equations. For philosophers, it forces a reconsideration of what it means to exist at all. If awareness is always bound to survival, then death may be something you can witness in others, but never in yourself. To illustrate this point, imagine a scenario where the probability of survival is extremely small. Perhaps you are in a situation with a 1 in a million chance of making it through. From an external perspective, the odds are grim. Most branches of reality end with your death. But from your perspective, you cannot experience those branches. You can only find yourself in the one where you survive, no matter how improbable. The continuity of consciousness ensures that the observer's story continues. Of course, this line of reasoning raises difficult questions. Does this mean that the universe is somehow biased toward the survival of consciousness? Or is it simply that consciousness, by its very nature, is incapable of registering its own absence? The latter explanation seems more consistent with physics. The branching occurs regardless of observers. It is the subjective experience of being an observer that guarantees continuity. In other words, the universe is not bending its rules to keep you alive. Instead, you are simply unable to notice the branches where you are not. This distinction is crucial. Quantum immortality does not imply that people are invincible in any objective sense. From the perspective of others, you may very well die. They will witness your absence, attend your funeral, and grieve your loss. In their branches of reality, your story ends. But from your perspective, there will always be a continuation, always another path where you remain conscious. The dilemma lies in the gap between external observation and internal experience. The observer's dilemma also highlights why this theory is both fascinating and disturbing. It suggests that your personal experience is guaranteed to continue, but it says nothing about the quality of that continuation. You might survive in universes where survival means enduring injury, suffering, or unlikely circumstances. The guarantee of consciousness is not a guarantee of comfort. It is a guarantee of endurance. As unsettling as this may be, the argument remains internally consistent. Observation plays a central role in quantum theory. Consciousness, as the seat of observation, ensures that you never experience its termination. Death, then, is always something that happens elsewhere, to other branches, to other versions of you, to the perspectives of others. But for the observer at the center of experience, the story does not end. This dilemma is what makes quantum immortality more than just a scientific curiosity. It touches on the deepest questions of existence, identity, and meaning. It forces us to ask not only how the universe works, but what it means to be an observer within it. And it sets the stage for the next part of our journey, where we will explore how survival across timelines becomes the logical extension of this framework. The concept of survival across timelines builds directly on the foundation of quantum mechanics and the many worlds interpretation. Imagine every moment of your life as a point where the universe branches. At each decision, accident, or random event, countless possible outcomes unfold. In one branch, you turn left at the street corner. In another, you turn right. In one version of your life, you catch the train. In another, you miss it. These everyday divergences are small, but when applied to life or death situations, the consequences become profound. The logic of quantum immortality suggests that in every scenario where you could die, there also exists at least one branch where you survive. Perhaps the car swerves at the last second. Perhaps the disease goes into remission unexpectedly. Perhaps the bullet jams, or the storm passes just in time. From the perspective of physics, all these branches exist. From your perspective as the observer, you always find yourself in the one where your awareness continues. This is not to say that you are consciously choosing survival. The branching is not guided by willpower or preference. Instead, it is the natural outcome of quantum indeterminacy. Every possible future that is consistent with the laws of physics exists in some version of reality. The key point is that your consciousness cannot register the branches where it ends. By definition, you will never be aware of the versions of reality where you cease to exist. Awareness is self-selecting. It can only continue where it is present. To grasp this idea, consider a simplified example. Imagine flipping a coin to decide your fate. If it lands heads, you survive. If tails, you do not. In a classical world, you would have a 50-50 chance of living or dying. But in a quantum framework, both outcomes occur. In one branch of reality, the coin lands heads, and you survive. In another, it lands tails, and your story ends. From an external perspective, these branches are equally real, but from your perspective, you can only ever continue in the branch where you survive. The tails branch is invisible to you because you are not there to observe it. Over time, this principle compounds. Every close call, every dangerous event, every potential ending splinters into multiple timelines. From the outside, most of these branches may end with your death, but you are not an outside observer of your own life. You are the conscious point moving through the timeline that does not break. No matter how improbable, there is always some version of events where you make it through, and that is the one you will experience. This way of thinking reframes survival as a certainty, not from the perspective of others, but from the perspective of the self. Friends, family, and strangers may watch you perish in their branches of reality. They will bury you, mourn you, and move on. But in your subjective experience, you will always wake up in the version of reality where you remain alive. Survival is not guaranteed for them, but for you, it is inevitable. The implications of this are staggering. It suggests that your personal timeline is biased toward continuity. No matter how dangerous the situation, there is always a path, however narrow, that leads to your survival. And because you cannot experience your own death, you will always perceive that path as the one you have taken. In this sense, the universe appears to conspire in favor of your awareness, not because it bends the rules for you, but because the rules allow for infinite outcomes, and your mind can only persist in the ones that remain unbroken. This also raises an unsettling possibility. If you will always experience survival, does that mean you may one day find yourself living through scenarios that stretch the very definition of existence? Imagine narrowly surviving accidents again and again, enduring events that seem impossible from an external perspective. Over long stretches of time, the odds stack against you, yet you keep finding yourself in the branch where you continue. The experience of survival becomes stranger, more unlikely, yet it does not end. Philosophers have pointed out that this paints a picture of existence that is both comforting and disturbing. Comforting, because it implies that your consciousness never fades into nothingness. Disturbing, because it offers no guarantee of peace. You may survive catastrophes that leave you broken, wounded, or isolated. You may persist in futures where others do not. Immortality in this sense does not promise happiness, only continuity. Still, the core idea remains. In every scenario, there is a branch where you live, and that is the one you, as the observer, will always inhabit. This is why the theory captures so much attention. It reframes mortality as a matter of perspective. From the outside, you can die. From the inside, you never truly do. To make this even clearer, Think of your life as a film projected across countless screens. Each screen shows a different version of events. On some, the story ends abruptly. On others, it continues with twists and turns. Your consciousness is like a spotlight that can only illuminate the screens where the story goes on. You will never see the screens that go dark, because your awareness cannot exist within them. No matter how many times the film seems to reach its end, there is always another reel, another continuation, another survival. This is the essence of survival across timelines. It does not require special intervention, divine favor, or supernatural power. It is simply the logical extension of a universe where every possible outcome exists. The observer, bound by the laws of consciousness, can only experience the outcomes where they remain alive. It is an inevitability built into the structure of reality itself. With this understanding, we move closer to the heart of quantum immortality. The theory is not about avoiding death in any external sense. It is about the unbroken continuity of subjective experience. No matter how improbable survival becomes, you will always find yourself in the branch where it happens. This principle forms the backbone of the argument. And in the next chapter, we will examine how it has been dramatized through one of the most striking thought experiments ever conceived. Quantum Russian roulette. Among the many thought experiments connected to quantum immortality, none is more provocative than the idea of quantum Russian roulette. At first glance, it appears reckless, even absurd, but it serves as a sharp way to illustrate how survival across timelines might feel to the observer. Imagine a person sets up a gun with a single bullet in one chamber, spins the cylinder, and pulls the trigger while pointing it at their head. In classical terms, the odds of survival are simple. With 6 chambers, there is a 1 in 6 chance of death and a 5 in 6 chance of life. Most of us would never dare take that risk, because in the overwhelming majority of outcomes, the person dies. That is the traditional understanding of probability. But when the scenario is placed within the framework of many worlds, the picture changes dramatically. Every possible outcome of pulling the trigger plays out in a branching reality. In some universes, the chamber is empty and the person survives. In others, the bullet fires and the story ends. For outside observers, both outcomes exist, and many will witness death. Yet for the participant, the one whose awareness is tied to the experiment, there is only one timeline they can experience, the one where they live. This is where the unsettling logic of quantum immortality becomes clear. To the person pulling the trigger, there is no version of reality in which their consciousness experiences death. In the universes where the bullet fires, they are gone, incapable of registering the outcome. In the universes where the chamber is empty, they remain alive, aware, and able to continue. From their subjective perspective, survival is absolute. They might pull the trigger once, twice, or 100 times, but in their experience, the gun never fires. Of course, this does not mean they are objectively immortal. Others in countless branches will watch them perish. They will grieve, bury, and remember. For them, death is final and undeniable. But for the participant, the experience is different. They move forward only along the threads of reality where they endure. No matter how unlikely survival becomes, it remains the only path they can personally follow. The disturbing implication is that someone attempting this experiment would feel as though they could not die. They would perceive themselves as defying probability, escaping death again and again. Each trigger pull would seem like a miracle, but from their perspective, it would simply be the inevitable continuation of awareness. They would not see the countless versions of themselves who perished in other timelines. Those versions are silent, unable to observe. Only the living perspective remains. This thought experiment is not meant to be taken as a literal suggestion. It is not an invitation to test the theory with real danger. Instead, it is a way of making vivid the strange logic of survival across timelines. It forces us to confront what it would mean if subjective experience is truly bound to continuity. For the participant, the odds no longer matter. No matter how small the chance of survival, that chance always exists somewhere, and the observer can only ever be present in that survival. Yet this scenario also highlights the darker side of the theory. If someone keeps pulling the trigger, their survival path narrows. They may escape death 100 times, 1,000 times, but each survival leaves them in a world where the odds are increasingly improbable. From an outside perspective, their survival would appear impossible, a violation of chance itself. From their perspective, it would simply be reality continuing, no matter how strange. The question then arises, what would it feel like to live in such a narrowing corridor of improbable events? Would the survivor begin to notice the fabric of their world bending around them? Would the universe they experience begin to look different, shaped by the fact that they persist against all odds? It is here that quantum Russian roulette ceases to be a mere game and becomes a window into the unsettling implications of immortality. One interpretation is that survival would feel normal, even mundane. Each time the chamber clicks empty, the survivor would shrug, perhaps marvel at their luck and move on. From within their experience, nothing supernatural has occurred. They are simply alive, as they always have been. The improbable does not feel improbable when it is the only outcome you can experience. Another interpretation is more haunting. As the survivor continues to endure, they might begin to notice that their reality feels thinner, stranger. Perhaps unlikely coincidences pile up. Accidents that should have been fatal leave them scarred, but breathing. Illnesses vanish without explanation. Disasters strike all around them but never quite reach them. Their world may start to look like a patchwork of impossibilities stitched together, each thread chosen only because it allowed consciousness to continue. This is why quantum Russian roulette resonates so deeply. It dramatizes the essence of quantum immortality. Death exists in countless branches, but not for the observer who asks what happens to them personally. For that observer, the story never ends, the gun never fires, the trigger always clicks harmlessly. And yet, this guarantee carries no promise of safety, comfort, or peace. It only promises endurance, however strange or lonely that endurance may become. The thought experiment also underscores the difference between subjective and objective perspectives. Objectively, most outcomes involve death. Subjectively, death cannot be experienced. Objectively, probability dictates the game. Subjectively, probability collapses into certainty, the certainty of survival. It is this clash between the external view of physics and the internal view of awareness that makes the theory so powerful and so troubling. In the end, quantum Russian roulette is not about testing immortality, but about revealing the paradox at its core. To others, you may die. To yourself, you never do. This is the dilemma of the observer pushed to its most extreme expression. And it raises questions not only about the nature of survival, but about the quality of the existence that follows. For if you are destined to survive every possible ending, what kind of life awaits you in those improbable branches? What becomes of identity when it stretches across countless timelines, always finding a way forward, yet often at a cost? These are the questions we turn to next, as we explore what it truly means to never die within the framework of quantum immortality. The phrase never die is seductive. It conjures images of invincibility, of a life free from harm, disease, or decay. But quantum immortality is not a promise of safety. It is not a shield against bullets or an elixir that heals all wounds. It is something subtler, stranger, and far more unsettling. It is the guarantee that your awareness never ends, that in some branch of the universe, no matter how improbable, you survive. To understand this distinction, it helps to draw a line between immortality and invulnerability. Invulnerability means nothing can hurt you. You walk through fire unscathed, bullets bounce off your skin, illness passes over you without effect. Immortality, in the quantum sense, is different. You are not protected from harm. You are not spared from suffering. You can be injured, scarred, broken and sick. You can experience pain as deeply as anyone else. The only difference is that somewhere, somehow, you persist. That persistence may not look like triumph. In one branch, you walk away from the crash unharmed. In another, you survive but with lasting injuries. In yet another, you linger in a hospital bed, clinging to life by the narrowest thread. All of these continuations are possible, and from your perspective, you will always find yourself in one of them. The theory does not say you live well, it says you live. This is where the unsettling weight of the idea becomes clear. Immortality in this form is not a blessing so much as an inevitability. You may survive the most improbable catastrophes, but survival does not mean restoration. It does not rewind time or erase damage. It only ensures that your consciousness remains in the branch where the story continues. Even if survival feels impossible, it will happen in some timeline, and you will be there to experience it. This also means that the experience of never dying is fundamentally solitary. Others around you do not share this guarantee. They may vanish in branches where they perish, leaving you behind in the versions where you remain. Over time, the people you love might disappear, and from your perspective, you will move forward into worlds where you continue without them. Death becomes something you observe, not something you undergo. Imagine the psychological toll this could create. Each time you face a life-threatening event, you might emerge alive, but perhaps increasingly isolated, increasingly wounded, increasingly aware of the strangeness of your continued existence. The odds that you survive may shrink to fractions so small they defy comprehension. Yet you will always find yourself on the narrow path where survival was possible. To you, this continuity feels unbroken. But from any external vantage point, your existence has become profoundly improbable. The practical difference between invulnerability and immortality becomes even sharper when we consider suffering. If you are invulnerable, suffering is impossible because no harm can touch you. If you are immortal in the quantum sense, suffering may be inescapable. You might find yourself living through outcomes where survival comes at extraordinary cost. Lifelong pain, endless recovery, or circumstances where death would have been the release denied to you. This is why philosophers who explore quantum immortality often warn against romanticizing it. The promise of never dying sounds alluring until one realizes that it carries no promise of quality. You may endure, but endurance can be brutal. In the most extreme cases, you might persist through situations that border on unbearable. From your perspective, those are the only paths left open, because every other branch ended with your absence. Yet within this grim possibility lies a profound insight about consciousness. The unbroken thread of awareness is what defines the self. Even when the body falters, even when circumstances collapse, awareness continues as long as there is some branch where it can. Death, in this framework, is not something you experience. It is only something that others see. To you, the observer, life never concludes. It only shifts into new, sometimes harsher continuations. To make this more concrete, imagine standing at the edge of a cliff where a single misstep would send you plummeting. In one universe you fall and the story ends. In another, you stumble but manage to grab a branch. In another, you slip but land in a way that leaves you battered but breathing. For the observer, that is you, only the latter two outcomes are possible to experience. The first, where you fall to your death, cannot exist within your awareness. You will never know that branch because there is no you left to know it. To you, the story always continues. Even if that continuation is painful, the unsettling realization is that immortality in this sense strips death of its finality but leaves everything else intact. Pain still hurts, loss still devastates, time still passes, bodies still age. The difference is that the end never arrives for the observer. You are carried forward through whatever improbable outcomes allow you to remain aware, while those around you pass into branches you can no longer follow. For many, This interpretation of immortality is far less comforting than it first appears. It suggests that death, the one certainty of life, may not apply to you in the way you expect. Instead of closing the book, it ensures that the pages keep turning, no matter how tattered or unsettling the story becomes. It challenges the very meaning of mortality by reframing it not as an event you undergo, but as a horizon you can never cross. This reframing forces us to ask difficult questions. If you never truly die, what does it mean to live well? If your awareness is guaranteed to continue, should you fear death at all, or should you fear the forms of survival that await you instead? Does this guarantee grant freedom, or does it impose a kind of eternal captivity? These are the paradoxes at the heart of quantum immortality, and they set the stage for examining identity itself. For if you persist across timelines in infinite forms, what does that say about the nature of the self? At the heart of the quantum immortality discussion lies a question more intimate than survival. Who exactly is the you that continues? When quantum mechanics tells us that reality splits into countless branches with every uncertain event, it isn't just the universe that multiplies, it's also you. Each version is born in that instant of division, carrying forward a unique history, a slightly altered memory, and a trajectory distinct from all the others. In everyday life, we tend to think of identity as stable, a single thread woven through time. You wake in the morning, remember yesterday, plan for tomorrow, and feel certain that the you making those plans is the same person who once learned to ride a bike as a child. This continuity gives life meaning, but quantum branching complicates that picture. With each split, there is not one continuous line, but a vast network of diverging paths, each holding a version of you who believes just as firmly in their own continuity. This leads to a staggering realization. Identity, under the many worlds framework, is not singular, but fragmented. There isn't one you making choices, but countless selves, each equally real, each equally convinced they are the original. From your perspective, this is invisible because you only ever occupy one of those lines. But from the cosmic perspective, there is no true version. There are simply many. Consider a simple event. You flip a coin and decide whether to go left or right. In one branch, the coin lands heads and you head left. In another, it lands tails and you go right. Each path gives rise to a version of you who remembers flipping the coin, but only recalls the outcome they saw. Neither is more authentic than the other. Both are genuine continuations. The self you feel so attached to is therefore not a single unbroken entity, but a multitude, each unfolding in parallel. This fragmentation creates deep questions about what it means to be conscious. If thousands or millions of you exist simultaneously, which one is truly you? The unsettling answer is all of them. Every branch holds an observer who feels they are the continuation of the past. The identity you carry is just one thread in an infinitely expanding tapestry. You are not the sum of those threads, but the perspective tied to the one you currently occupy. The implications for immortality are profound. When we say you never die, we are not speaking of every version of you. Most branches end, and in those universes, the self tied to them ceases. What the theory suggests is that you, the subjective observer, will always find yourself in the rarest branches where survival occurs. But this doesn't eliminate the fragmentation. Instead, it amplifies it. You will go on, but countless others will not, and they are no less real in the grand structure of the multiverse. This means that your consciousness is not a single flame carried forward without interruption. It is more like a vast field of sparks, each flickering into existence with every uncertain event. From within one spark, the illusion of singularity is complete. You feel whole, continuous, unbroken. Yet the reality, as physics frames it, is that wholeness is only one perspective in a sea of branching lives. For some, this fragmentation is liberating. It suggests that identity is not rigid, but endlessly adaptive. capable of becoming whatever circumstances demand. You are not locked into a single destiny, but spread across many. For others, the idea is deeply unsettling. If there are countless versions of you, does that dilute your uniqueness? Does it mean that you are less significant? Just one of an infinite number of variations. One way to approach this is to think of identity less as an object and more as a process. Who you are is not fixed but continually unfolding through choices, experiences, and perceptions. Each branch continues that unfolding, but only one is available to your awareness at any given moment. The process doesn't vanish because it multiplies. Instead, it reveals how fluid identity truly is. Philosophers often connect this to the ship of Theseus problem. If every plank of a ship is replaced over time, is it still the same ship? In quantum terms, the problem becomes far stranger. Instead of one ship being slowly rebuilt, there are countless ships diverging at every moment, each claiming to be the original. All are correct. All are authentic. None can be singled out as the true one. For quantum immortality, the fractured self introduces a paradox. The observer who never dies is one among many, yet to that observer, continuity is absolute. This means the immortality you experience is not universal but personal. It doesn't apply to every version of you, but only to the specific thread of awareness that never encounters an ending. The self that continues is not chosen by destiny or favored by fate. It is simply the one that remains aware. This raises a haunting possibility that you, as an observer, may feel eternal, but you are only ever one branch among infinite versions of yourself who did not make it. From your perspective, their absence is invisible. From the wider view, however, your existence is just one fragment among countless others. The identity you cherish is both unique and endlessly replicated, both personal and multiplied. This duality forces us to rethink what it means to be you. If the self is fragmented across timelines, perhaps individuality is less about being singular and more about being situated. You are not the only you, but you are the one tied to this particular stream of experience. That does not make your identity any less real. It only reframes it as one of many equally valid continuations. When applied to survival, the fractured self reveals both comfort and unease. Comfort, because no matter what happens, there will always be a you that continues. Unease, because that continuation is not the whole story. It is only one thread among countless others that have ended. The immortality you experience is inseparable from the fragmentation of identity. You endure, but always as one piece of a larger, ever-branching whole. And so, the theory of quantum immortality is not just about living forever. It is about recognizing that forever belongs not to a single, unbroken self, but to a fractured, multiplied identity scattered across the multiverse. The self you feel is genuine, but it is also only one of many. And immortality is the persistence of that perspective amid infinite branching. At the center of quantum immortality lies a puzzle that feels both scientific and deeply personal. How can consciousness, so fragile and dependent on a functioning body, appear to endure without interruption even in a universe where countless versions of you meet their end? The answer, or at least the proposal, is that awareness flows like a thread through possibility, weaving itself into whichever branch allows survival. To the observer, that thread never breaks. Even though countless parallel versions may have unraveled entirely, think for a moment about falling asleep and waking up. In dreamless sleep, hours pass without memory or perception, and yet, upon waking, you feel as though your consciousness has continued seamlessly. The gap is invisible because your awareness stitches the moments together into one continuous flow. In much the same way, the theory of quantum immortality suggests that subjective experience glides across the branching landscape of reality, attaching itself to the outcomes where perception remains possible. To you, it feels unbroken. To the larger universe, however, it is scattered and selective. From an external view, death is final. The body ceases, neural activity halts, and identity dissolves. But from the inside, from the perspective of the observer, there is no experience of non-existence. Awareness cannot observe its own absence. This is the crucial loophole in the narrative of mortality. If countless branches exist, then among them, some paths will preserve you, no matter how improbable. Subjective experience, bound by its very nature to continuity, will flow into those paths. The thread does not see itself as interrupted, because interruption is precisely the one thing it cannot perceive. Imagine a climber scaling a dangerous cliff. In most branches of the multiverse, a slip of the hand could mean tragedy, the end of that version's journey. But in the rare branches where the grip holds or where chance intervenes in just the right way, survival persists. The climber in those branches continues to feel conscious, unaware of the many versions who fell. In their story, the climb goes on. For the observer who lives, the thread of awareness has not snapped. It simply carried forward into the only outcome where continuation was possible. This perspective challenges our ordinary understanding of probability. From the outside, an accident might have a 99% chance of ending in death. From within, however, the observer only ever finds themselves in the 1% where survival occurred. The odds dissolve in the face of subjectivity. Consciousness, like a river, does not acknowledge the dry streams that never reach the ocean. It only flows where there is a channel to carry it forward. What makes this so striking is how personal the continuity feels. Each version of you in the multiverse is a fully conscious being, but the one you experience is defined by the fact that its awareness is unbroken. This does not mean that all versions of you endure. Most do not, but it explains why you never experience an end. The thread you are bound to by perspective is always the one that goes on. Some have compared this to a spotlight in a theater. On the stage, countless actors stand ready, each representing a possible version of you. The play unfolds, and as events branch, the spotlight shifts, illuminating one actor after another. The audience, the conscious observer, never sees the stagehands moving the light. From their perspective, the spotlight has always followed the same figure. The illusion of continuity remains perfect because the gaps are never visible. What you experience as a single, uninterrupted story is simply the spotlight of awareness, attaching itself to whichever version remains capable of perceiving. Of course, this raises troubling questions about identity. If consciousness flows like a thread, does that mean you are simply the product of whichever version happens to remain alive? Or does the thread itself represent something deeper, an essence that cannot be reduced to physical states alone? Some philosophers argue that subjective awareness is not tied to one brain or one body, but to the ongoing fact of perception itself. Wherever perception continues, there you are. The thread is not physical, but experiential. The theory does not require you to imagine an immortal soul in the traditional sense. It only requires you to recognize that awareness cannot inhabit non-existence. The moment of death, from the observer's point of view, is never experienced. Instead, consciousness finds itself aligned with the improbable paths where survival has occurred. The thread extends forward, even when logic says it should have ended. To understand this more deeply, picture yourself reading a story. If the book suddenly ended mid-sentence, with pages torn out, you would feel a sense of incompleteness. But if another copy of the book exists with the missing pages intact, your experience of reading remains whole. The thread of narrative is not in the book itself, but in your act of following it. Consciousness, in the quantum view, works similarly. The story is not broken because you can never read the missing pages. You only experience the version where the narrative carries on. This continuity does not mean immortality is blissful or easy. Survival in some branches may involve immense struggle, pain, or unlikely circumstances. But for the observer, even these paths are preferable to the one experience they cannot have. Non-existence. The unbroken thread does not promise comfort. It promises only continuation. In that sense, it offers a kind of immortality stripped of myth, grounded not in divine grace, but in the structure of quantum possibility. Yet, despite its cold logic, the idea carries an undeniable weight of wonder. The thought that your awareness might always find a way forward, that the thread of consciousness never truly severs, touches something profound in the human spirit. It reframes life not as a fragile line racing toward an endpoint, but as a thread woven through an infinite fabric of chances. That thread may fray, bend, or twist, but it never vanishes, because it never perceives its own absence. The mystery of consciousness as an unbroken thread leaves us with a paradox. Objectively, death is everywhere in the multiverse. Subjectively, it is nowhere. For the observer, awareness stretches on, carried by the improbable branches that remain intact. In that strange interplay between possibility and perception, quantum immortality finds its most unsettling power. The promise that you will never know the moment when the story ends, because for you, the story always continues. When physicists speak about probability, they are describing a mathematical framework that predicts how likely an outcome is to occur across many trials. Toss a coin, and the odds are 50-50. Roll a die, and the chance of landing on a 3 is 1 in 6. These probabilities hold because over a large number of attempts, the outcomes distribute themselves according to expectation. But quantum immortality disrupts this logic in a deeply unsettling way, because the probabilities that apply universally do not seem to apply to the individual observer. For you, subjectively, the experience is always survival, no matter how small the odds. This creates a striking paradox. On one hand, probability tells us that most branches of the multiverse end in outcomes where you perish. From an objective standpoint, the overwhelming majority of versions of you will not make it past a fatal accident, a terminal illness, or an unlucky circumstance. On the other hand, subjectively, you only ever encounter the version where awareness continues. That means the numbers may predict a near certain ending, but your lived experience is one of uninterrupted survival. It is as if probability collapses when filtered through consciousness. The one outcome you can never experience is the one where awareness stops. So your perspective is skewed towards survival every single time. From the outside, this is a distortion. From the inside, it feels like certainty. To the observer, immortality is not a statistical anomaly, but a personal inevitability. Take the example of a high-stakes gamble. Suppose there is a 1% chance of making it through a dangerous situation alive. From the outside, most versions of you do not succeed, but from within, you never witness failure. The 99 outcomes where you did not survive are invisible to you, because perception cannot inhabit them. The only experience you can possibly report is the one where you made it through. What was improbable from a universal view becomes inevitable from the personal one. This is where the paradox sharpens. Probability is supposed to describe reality in a way that applies equally to everyone. Yet quantum immortality shows how the observer's perspective warps those numbers. For most versions of you, the odds hold true, but for the one version tied to your awareness, the statistics no longer matter. You inhabit a line of survival, one that threads through improbability as though guided by destiny. Though no external force is at work, the illusion of certainty grows stronger with each improbable escape. Imagine facing a series of situations where survival seems unlikely. Accidents, illnesses, natural disasters. In almost all branches the chain ends, but in at least one branch you survive. From your point of view, survival strings itself together, forming a continuous path. It feels as if probability itself bends around you, as if you are exempt from the rules that govern everyone else. This sensation, however, is not the result of special protection, but simply the unavoidable outcome of perception. You can only walk the path where the thread of consciousness remains intact. The paradox lies in the mismatch between personal certainty and universal probability. If quantum immortality is real, then each of us lives in a contradiction. We are part of a cosmos where death is overwhelmingly likely, yet we also inhabit a subjective experience where it never arrives. The numbers point one way, but the lived story unfolds another. This dissonance invites both awe and unease. On one hand, it paints survival as inevitable, no matter how extreme the odds. On the other, it forces us to confront the strange isolation of our perspective. We may feel immortal, but this immortality is not shared. It does not rewrite the universal probabilities. It only reshapes them from within the narrow corridor of experience. Consider the analogy of a lottery. Millions of tickets are sold, and the chance of winning is astronomically small. To the population as a whole, the odds hold true. Yet for the one winner, the experience is absolute certainty. They are holding the ticket, they have the prize, and the improbability of it feels irrelevant. Quantum immortality takes this phenomenon to an extreme. Instead of money, the prize is continued awareness. Instead of one unlikely win, survival occurs over and over again, an endless sequence of improbable victories strung together into a single narrative. Some critics argue that this line of reasoning misuses probability. They point out that just because a version of you survives does not mean you should expect to feel immortal. The statistical truth remains: most versions of you will not continue. But this criticism misses the crucial distinction between third-person perspective and first-person experience. From the outside, probability is king. From the inside, only survival is ever known. The paradox is not in the mathematics, but in the way consciousness interacts with it. This raises an uncomfortable question. Is immortality, in this sense, merely an illusion? If every version of you eventually ends, but you only ever experience the surviving thread, are you truly eternal, or are you simply unable to perceive your own absence? The difference may seem semantic, but it cuts to the heart of the theory. Immortality here is not the elimination of death. It is the absence of death as an experience. To you, it feels real. To the universe, it is statistical noise. The paradox also extends into philosophy. If each observer experiences survival, then does every consciousness in the universe feel immortal from within, even though all are subject to the same probabilities? If so, then immortality is not a rare gift, but a universal illusion, one that every being carries privately, never realizing that it is rooted in perspective rather than reality. At its core, the theory of quantum immortality does not abolish probability, but reframes it. Survival is not the most likely outcome, but it is the only one you can ever know. The paradox is that probability holds true across the multiverse, but for the individual observer, it collapses into certainty. You live again and again because you cannot witness anything else. The numbers remain intact, yet your experience seems to defy them. In this tension between universal probability and personal certainty, the essence of quantum immortality reveals itself. You are both ordinary and extraordinary, both subject to the same cosmic rules and seemingly exempt from their finality. The paradox is not something to be solved, but something to be lived. A reminder that the world as experienced and the world as measured do not always align. In that gap, immortality takes shape, not as a gift, not as a miracle, but as the inevitable illusion of an observer who can never see their own end. The notion of quantum immortality can seem detached from daily life, confined to the abstract halls of physics and philosophy. Yet when we turn our attention to the human experience, we find countless stories that echo its logic. From remarkable survival tales to near-death experiences, people often describe moments that feel as though reality bent in their favor, delivering them through impossible odds. These narratives, while anecdotal, resonate with the idea that awareness clings to the branches where survival continues. Consider the driver who walks away from a car crash that, by all accounts, should have been fatal. Witnesses insist there was no chance of survival, yet the person emerges battered but alive. Or the hiker who slips from a cliffside and somehow lands in just the right way to avoid catastrophic injury. These moments are rare, but they are not isolated. They fill news reports, family stories, and personal accounts across cultures. Each instance invites the same question: how could someone live through that? For most, the answer is luck. For those who look at the world through the lens of quantum immortality, these stories take on a deeper significance. Survival against overwhelming odds becomes more than coincidence. It becomes the expected outcome from the observer's perspective. Out of the countless versions of events across the multiverse, most end in tragedy, but in at least one, survival occurs. And that is the one the survivor experiences. To those around them, it looks miraculous. To the person themselves, it is simply the continuation of their story. Near-death experiences carry this resonance even further. Across time and culture, people who brush close to death often describe vivid moments of awareness floating outside their body, seeing tunnels of light, or encountering an overwhelming sense of peace. Science explains these phenomena as neurological events, the brain's response to trauma and oxygen deprivation. But within the framework of quantum immortality, these experiences take on another layer of meaning. They can be seen as the mind's threshold crossing, the moment when countless versions end, but the thread of consciousness finds a path forward. The surreal vividness of near-death reports could reflect the boundary between endings that cannot be perceived and the improbable survival that must be experienced. Take, for instance, the soldier in battle who survives despite being in the deadliest crossfire. Bullets strike all around, comrades fall, and yet somehow they remain untouched. Many such stories are documented in memoirs and interviews. Survivors often describe the aftermath with disbelief, as if reality itself had shielded them. For the theory of quantum immortality, this disbelief is not surprising. In the multiverse, most outcomes would have ended differently, but the observer can only recount the one in which their awareness continued. Medical cases also echo the logic. Patients who survive surgeries against impossible odds, or those who recover from conditions deemed terminal, often puzzle doctors. Statistical models say survival should not happen, yet in rare cases it does. For the patient, survival is the only story they can tell. They do not experience the branches where they did not make it. Once again, the theory suggests that subjective continuity favors the unlikely thread where life persists. Of course, none of these accounts prove quantum immortality. They can all be explained within the conventional framework of chance, resilience, or medical error. But what makes them compelling in this context is how perfectly they mirror the logic of the theory. Each survival story is a personal testament to the fact that awareness is always tied to the outcome where it goes on. Each near-death vision is a reminder that consciousness does not register endings, but only transitions. For those who entertain this interpretation, the world becomes filled with subtle confirmations. Every time someone recounts a miraculous escape, it is another echo of the principle that awareness never aligns with its own demise. It is always carried forward, regardless of how improbable the survival may seem. But there is also a sobering side to these echoes. If quantum immortality underlies these experiences, then it implies that survivors are not chosen or protected in any cosmic sense. Their continuation is not evidence of destiny or special purpose. It is simply the inevitable outcome of subjectivity. From the survivor's perspective, the miracle was unavoidable, not because the odds were in their favor, but because they could never perceive the branches where they were not. This perspective reframes personal stories of survival in a profound way. Rather than seeing them as anomalies, they can be viewed as the natural unfolding of the observer's thread. Each person who recounts such a story is speaking from the only perspective they could possibly inhabit, the one where they lived. In some ways, this realization makes these echoes more human, not less. It reminds us that our experiences are shaped by perspective as much as by probability. It shows us that the line between chance and certainty depends on where you stand. For those who live through impossible odds, survival feels absolute. For those who observe from the outside, it feels improbable. Both are true, but only one is experienced. This duality explains why real-life echoes of quantum immortality feel so powerful. They blur the line between coincidence and inevitability, between miracle and logic. Each story becomes both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary because it fits within the rules of probability. Extraordinary because it aligns so perfectly with the unbroken thread of consciousness. Near-death experiences, miraculous survivals, and improbable recoveries may not prove the theory, but they illuminate it. They offer windows into how it might feel to live within a universe where awareness never ceases, where the thread always finds a way forward. To the survivor, it is not an abstract concept, but a lived truth. To those listening, it is a reminder that reality may be stranger and more layered than we ever imagined. Up until now, the focus has largely been on the remarkable possibility of survival, on how awareness seems to cling to the branches of reality where life continues. But this idea carries with it a shadow that is far harder to ignore. If consciousness never aligns with its own end, then what follows is not only survival against odds, but also survival through situations that might be unbearable. The theory does not promise peace or comfort. It does not suggest that one drifts into eternity unscathed. Instead, it implies that the continuation of awareness can come with extreme suffering, drawn-out existence, or improbable states of survival that defy what most would consider merciful. Imagine for a moment someone caught in a catastrophic accident. From an external perspective, the likelihood of fatal injury is overwhelming. Yet, if quantum immortality is true, the observer within that body never experiences the branches where death occurs. Instead, they find themselves in the slivers of possibility where life clings on. That survival might not be clean or painless. It might involve waking up in agony, with broken bones, permanent disabilities, or lingering trauma. To the outside world, the odds of this outcome are minuscule. To the person within, it is inevitable. This darker interpretation reframes what survival means. It is not a guarantee of triumph, but rather a guarantee of continuation. And continuation can come at a cost. Pain, suffering, and the erosion of quality of life become possible constants in this framework. From the perspective of probability, these outcomes are rare, but from the perspective of the one who cannot cease to experience, they become unavoidable. Medical cases bring this into sharp focus. There are patients who endure conditions that doctors would have deemed unsurvivable. People who linger in comas for years, who live with locked-in syndrome, or who endure prolonged illnesses that should statistically end their lives, but somehow do not. For the patient, awareness, sometimes dim, sometimes painfully sharp, carries on. In the context of this theory, it is not chance, but certainty that they continue on the paths where survival persists, no matter how diminished that survival might be. This line of thought leads to a chilling implication. If death cannot be subjectively experienced, then awareness may be condemned to inhabit every possible branch where it avoids extinction. Even if those branches are riddled with misery, it would mean living through improbable recoveries, surviving accidents that leave one permanently scarred, enduring situations where life becomes an endless struggle. In other words, immortality may not be blissful. It could be relentless. Consider also the psychological weight of this realization. If one truly internalized the idea of quantum immortality, every brush with danger would take on a new meaning. It would not be a question of whether survival will happen, But in what form? Falling from a great height, facing illness, or stepping into a perilous situation, each carries not only the chance of escape, but also the possibility of enduring unimaginable outcomes. In this framework, suffering is not avoided, but endured, because awareness always flows toward the continuation of itself. This perspective transforms what might otherwise seem miraculous into something more ambivalent. The soldier who survives against the odds may also carry unbearable physical and emotional scars. The patient who beats the prognosis may live with chronic pain. The accident survivor may never fully recover. Survival is guaranteed, but the cost of that guarantee can be profound. One way to understand this is through the concept of probability distribution. Most outcomes in the multiverse may involve a quick, painless death in a catastrophic event. A very small set of outcomes involve survival, often with damage or suffering attached. But for the observer, those small probabilities are the only experiences available. This creates a kind of distortion, where the lived experience is not the most likely from an external perspective, but the one that preserves consciousness at any cost. This shadow side of the theory also challenges how we think about hope. In ordinary life, hope is tied to favorable outcomes, to recovery, to relief. Within this framework, hope becomes complicated. You may survive, but survival is not synonymous with relief. It may instead mean persisting through unimaginable circumstances, with awareness carrying you forward into branches where suffering stretches endlessly. This realization has led some to call quantum immortality a curse disguised as a gift. What appears to be freedom from death could in fact be entrapment within survival. It suggests a universe where there is no final release, only the persistence of subjective experience, no matter how improbable or painful. In such a universe, what we think of as endings would be inaccessible. All that would remain are the fragments where continuation, no matter how diminished, still exists. Philosophically, this opens unsettling questions about the nature of identity and mercy. If one cannot cease to exist, what does that mean for the concept of closure? If awareness endures through endless suffering, what role does compassion play? It also challenges the idea of personal control. In this framework, no choice, no act, no external force can grant escape. Consciousness itself becomes inescapable, carried forward into whatever improbable survival exists. This perspective also reframes real-world fears. For many, the fear of death is overwhelming. But within this theory, the greater fear becomes survival itself. Survival through pain, through loss, through endless endurance. Death, in this view, is not the enemy, because it cannot be subjectively known. The enemy becomes suffering without end, the certainty of survival in branches where one might wish otherwise. What emerges then is a paradox. Quantum immortality offers the promise of continuity, but it also exposes the possibility that this continuity may not be desirable. The theory does not discriminate between pleasant and unpleasant experiences. It only suggests that awareness cannot register its own end, which means that the very mechanism that guarantees survival could just as easily guarantee suffering. This darker side of the theory forces us to reconsider what it means to value life. If survival is inevitable, the question becomes not whether one will continue, but how one continues. It places emphasis on quality, on the conditions of existence, rather than mere persistence. And it confronts us with the possibility that immortality in this framework may not be a gift to be embraced, but a reality to be endured. To speak of immortality is usually to speak of triumph, of a conquest over the inevitability of death. Yet when quantum immortality is examined closely, the idea takes on an entirely different weight. This is not the immortality of myths or religions where one transcends the body and steps into a realm of peace. This is survival without conclusion, an existence that cannot stop, an awareness that stretches forward into whatever narrow crack of possibility allows it. The very inability to escape existence is what makes this interpretation both haunting and profound. In ordinary human thought, death provides an endpoint. It is not simply the cessation of the body, but a horizon that gives structure to the story of life. Knowing that one day life concludes makes moments meaningful. It allows for closure, for cycles to feel complete, for suffering to carry an implied limit. If death is denied to the observer, those boundaries dissolve. What follows is not freedom, but an eternal extension that strips existence of its final punctuation. Life becomes an unbroken sentence that continues regardless of how heavy or unbearable it might grow. Imagine standing at the edge of an abyss, where every outcome points toward falling. From the outside, most observers see the fall as inevitable, a matter of statistics. Yet within, for the one caught in the plunge, there is always some improbable foothold that appears, some miracle of survival. That foothold may not lift you back to safety. It may leave you clinging, bloodied and exhausted, yet still alive. And because awareness cannot register falling into nothingness, you remain. Over and over, in every scenario where life could extinguish, another foothold appears. This is immortality without escape. A survival that feels less like salvation and more like an unbreakable chain. The existential weight of this vision is immense. To know that existence cannot be left behind is to know that every form of suffering, every possible degradation might be lived through. There is no door to step through, no ending to anticipate. In this framework, even the idea of eternal rest becomes inaccessible. What remains is the certainty that awareness continues. However fractured, however diminished, however improbable the circumstances. For some, this vision raises the most unsettling possibility of all, that one might survive into states of existence that no longer resemble life as we understand it, stripped of health, stripped of control, stripped of dignity, yet still aware in some thread of consciousness. It is not difficult to imagine scenarios where survival feels less like living and more like imprisonment. To be trapped within one's own body, or within endless improbable realities, is to carry on without the possibility of escape. This absence of escape transforms how we think about the meaning of existence itself. In a finite life, one can frame suffering as temporary, as something endured with the promise of eventual release. In an unending life, that release never arrives. Suffering is not framed by an endpoint, but stretches endlessly. This introduces a kind of weight that no human mind is fully prepared to bear. Even joy, even comfort becomes tinted with this awareness. For if existence never concludes, then every moment carries the knowledge that there is no final rest, only continuation. Philosophers have long wrestled with the fear of death, but quantum immortality replaces that fear with something more intricate. It suggests that the true horror is not the void, but the impossibility of reaching it, to never know silence, to never dissolve, to never end. This is the existential shadow hidden within the theory. It is not death that threatens, but its absence. In this framework, even hope becomes fragile. The notion of escape, of release from suffering, is central to how humans endure hardship. People cling to the idea that suffering, however severe, will not last forever. Yet if awareness is carried forward infinitely, then that promise of release may never arrive. Hope itself becomes distorted, because the only certainty is persistence. No matter the odds, no matter the cost, you continue. This realization also reframes how one might view acts of desperation. In a universe where quantum immortality holds, even attempts to end life do not achieve the intended conclusion. From the external perspective, outcomes may vary. From the internal perspective, the observer only continues along branches where they survive. The intended escape never manifests. What seems like finality becomes yet another path of improbable survival, often bringing with it consequences more severe than what preceded it. This is the deepest layer of the existential weight. Not only can one not escape naturally, but one cannot escape intentionally either. And so, the immortality promised here is not liberation, but entrapment. It is a guarantee that awareness cannot dissolve, that it will find its way into every crack where survival exists, however slim those cracks might be. It challenges the very notion of choice, stripping agency from the idea of ending one's own story. In this view, existence becomes not something you control, but something you endure. The implications ripple outward into how one understands identity, dignity, and meaning. If life stretches endlessly without conclusion, then meaning must be redefined. Traditional frameworks, closure, legacy, the finality of death lose their foundation. What remains is the ongoing thread of awareness, looping through improbable outcomes, carrying the self into places that cannot be anticipated. Meaning can no longer be tied to an ending, but must be found within the endurance itself. This creates a paradox. On one hand, the impossibility of escape strips existence of its comforting boundaries. On the other, it forces a radical shift in how meaning is constructed. To live with the knowledge of immortality without escape is to confront existence in its rawest form, without the shelter of finality. It is to face the weight of survival not as triumph, but as inevitability. Ultimately, immortality without escape reveals the most profound challenge of quantum immortality. It is not simply the scientific question of whether consciousness persists across branches. It is the existential recognition that persistence without end might not be a gift at all. It could be the heaviest burden of all, an awareness carried forward into eternity. Unable to dissolve, unable to rest, unable to escape. Immortality in the quantum sense is rarely imagined in terms of companionship. When the idea is stripped down, it is not the promise of living forever with loved ones or sharing eternity with humanity as a whole. Instead, it is the stark possibility of persisting when everyone else eventually disappears. The observer always finds themselves alive in some branch, but nothing within the theory guarantees that others must follow the same unbroken path. In fact, the unsettling implication is that while you carry on, those around you may not. This isolation is perhaps one of the most profound and disturbing aspects of quantum immortality. If the theory holds, then every near-death moment extends only for the one experiencing it. Each improbable survival applies uniquely to the observer's awareness, which means in the long run, you may look around and see the familiar faces vanish, not all at once, but steadily. A spouse, a friend, a parent, a child. Each of them carries their own thread of consciousness, but their survival is not tied to yours. Their branches may lead elsewhere, leaving you in a reality where they did not survive. Over time, those separations compound, and what remains is the solitary persistence of your own awareness. Consider this in practical terms. Imagine a family driving together, and a catastrophic accident unfolds. For the individual whose awareness must persist, there may always be some improbable configuration of events that allows them to survive. But that guarantee does not extend to the others. In the version of events where you continue, they may not. Your awareness is preserved, but their presence is not guaranteed in the same way. What unfolds then is a life carried forward, scarred by loss, where continuity belongs to you alone. This creates a picture of immortality that feels less like triumph and more like desertion. To carry on when others cannot is to shoulder the weight of memory without the relief of reunion. Traditional views of immortality often carry with them the comfort of shared eternity heaven, as a place where souls meet again, or reincarnation as cycles intertwined with others. Quantum immortality strips away that comfort. It isolates the observer, placing them on a path that extends forward regardless of who falls away. The loneliness of eternal survival also challenges the very foundation of human connection. Our relationships are built on shared time, shared finitude, shared mortality. When those around you face an end that you cannot, the bond shifts. You remain tethered to experiences they can no longer share. Their absence becomes permanent in a way that no length of time can resolve, because you cannot follow them. The door that death provides to others is one you cannot pass through. You remain, watching the bonds unravel, watching memories accumulate without release. This loneliness deepens as the scale of time expands. Across decades, centuries, and beyond, the pool of familiar faces thins. Generations pass, cultures rise and fall, civilizations collapse and rebuild. Yet within some improbable continuity you remain. The people you knew, the worlds you recognized, slip away. What persists is awareness, stripped of its anchors, drifting forward in realities that feel increasingly alien. It is not just people who vanish, but context. The language you once spoke may disappear. The landscapes you once knew may transform. Even the patterns of human life may shift beyond recognition. And in each improbable thread where you continue, you must adapt, learn, and persist. But the absence of those who shaped your earliest identity cannot be filled. The loneliness is not just the loss of companionship, but the loss of continuity with your own past. In this sense, quantum immortality becomes less about living forever and more about witnessing forever. To survive when others do not is to carry their absence into every new moment. Your awareness becomes a vessel of memory, holding on to voices that cannot return, faces that cannot reappear, bonds that cannot be rekindled. This kind of loneliness is not the temporary isolation of a single lifetime. It is the infinite extension of separation, repeated across every improbable survival. The psychological toll of such loneliness is difficult to imagine. In ordinary life, grief is tempered by time and the eventual knowledge that one will also join the departed. In quantum immortality, that resolution never comes. You grieve, but you never leave. You ache for reunion, but you remain. The cycle repeats endlessly, with each loss layering onto the last, building a weight that cannot be lifted. This leads to an even darker speculation, that eternal survival might eventually erode the very capacity to feel connection. If every bond is destined to dissolve while you continue, you may retreat into detachment, building walls around yourself to blunt the pain of loss. Over centuries, over millennia, awareness could transform into something cold, something solitary, something unrecognizable as human. Loneliness does not just wound, it reshapes. Eternal survival in solitude might not just strip you of companionship, but of the very ability to long for it. And yet, even in this bleak vision, the thread of awareness cannot be severed. Whether hollowed by loss or burdened by memory, the observer persists. There is no opting out, no closure, no final reunion. There is only the awareness carried forward into the next improbable survival, each new reality devoid of the companions left behind. This is the essence of loneliness in the quantum frame, not a temporary condition, but a permanent feature of immortality itself. The loneliness of eternal survival, thus, becomes one of the most powerful critiques of quantum immortality. It forces us to ask, what is life without others to share it with? What is survival if it comes at the cost of connection? Is consciousness, stripped of companionship and stretched into eternity, still life as we understand it, or has it become something entirely different? Quantum immortality does not provide easy answers. It only presents the possibility that in the long run, the observer's thread stretches further than anyone else's. And in that persistence lies the greatest solitude imaginable, an awareness that continues not in company, but in isolation, carrying forward into eternity alone. The idea of immortality becomes even more unsettling when we shift the scale beyond personal life and death, beyond the losses of loved ones, and ask what happens when the universe itself reaches its end. For centuries, philosophers and scientists have speculated about the ultimate fate of the cosmos. Modern cosmology presents us with a handful of scenarios: heat death, the Big Rip, the Big Crunch, or even vacuum decay. Each one paints a picture of a universe that cannot last forever. If quantum immortality suggests that awareness never finds an ending, what happens when reality itself collapses? The most widely accepted fate today is heat death. In this scenario, the universe continues expanding. Stars burn out, galaxies drift apart, and energy spreads so thin that nothing new can happen. It is a future of endless silence, where no structures remain, no stars ignite, and no warmth exists. In such a state, all forms of life would appear impossible. Consciousness, dependent on complex structures and energy flow, should vanish. Yet quantum immortality suggests that the observer's thread must continue. If every possible outcome exists somewhere in the branching multiverse, there might always be one improbable path in which awareness finds a way to persist, even as entropy erases everything recognizable. Another scenario is the Big Rip. Here, the expansion of the universe accelerates so violently that galaxies are torn apart, then solar systems, then planets, then atoms themselves. It is not just the collapse of stars or galaxies, it is the unraveling of matter at the most fundamental level. For an observer trapped in this fate, there should be no survival. And yet, if quantum immortality holds, the observer may still experience improbable continuations. Perhaps in some branches, the rip slows, or physics shifts just enough to allow survival in a reconfigured form. Even as matter dissolves, the awareness tethered to existence might migrate into whatever improbable pocket still permits it. Then there is the Big Crunch, a cyclical model where expansion reverses, pulling everything back together into an ultimate collapse. The cosmos shrinks into a singularity of unimaginable density and heat, erasing all distinctions. To ordinary physics, this marks a final moment. But quantum immortality leaves room for a different perspective. The observer might pass into some offshoot, where collapse does not destroy them, or where the universe rebounds into another expansion, dragging their awareness into a new cycle. The end, in this interpretation, becomes another improbable beginning. Vacuum decay presents an even stranger possibility. Our universe may not be in its most stable state. If a more stable form of vacuum exists, a bubble of it could appear spontaneously and expand at the speed of light, rewriting the laws of physics as it spreads. No warning, no escape, no survival. Yet here again, quantum immortality challenges that finality. For the observer, there may always exist one improbable branch where the bubble does not touch them, or where new laws of physics accommodate consciousness in some unrecognizable way. What all of these scenarios share is a profound collision between cosmic mortality and subjective immortality. Physics describes universes that end. Quantum immortality describes an observer that does not. The tension between these two ideas pushes us into territory that is both unsettling and difficult to fully grasp. What does it mean to survive the death of the cosmos? What form could awareness possibly take when matter and energy themselves unravel? One speculation is that survival becomes less about physical form and more about continuity of awareness in whatever improbable structures remain. Imagine consciousness reduced to the smallest flicker of ordered information in a sea of chaos. Perhaps, in some branches, physical laws allow for stability in unexpected corners, like tiny islands persisting in a cosmic storm. The body may vanish, civilizations may disappear, but awareness clings to improbable footholds, carried forward endlessly. Another speculation is even stranger, that the end of one universe coincides with the emergence of another. In multiverse theories, new universes may constantly bud off from old ones. If so, an observer's thread of survival might leap from a collapsing universe into a newly formed one. What appears as cosmic death from one perspective could be rebirth from another. The observer stitched into a sequence of universes, never encountering true finality. But here lies the unsettling implication. The awareness that persists may not resemble anything familiar, without others to share it, without stable forms or recognizable environments. What remains might be consciousness stripped bare, a raw continuity floating through improbable conditions. The universe ends, yet awareness lingers, carrying memory into silence, perhaps endlessly searching for structure in a reality that no longer provides it. For the human mind, this is almost impossible to picture. Life has always been tied to environments, to bodies, to communities, to matter itself. The thought of surviving beyond all that feels like a paradox, yet the logic of quantum immortality presses us toward that conclusion. If death is always evaded subjectively, then even the death of the universe cannot stop awareness. The end of everything is not the end for the observer. This realization deepens the unsettling nature of the theory. Immortality on the scale of a single lifetime already carries heavy implications of loss and suffering. Immortality, stretched across cosmic time, magnifies that weight to infinity. It raises the possibility of an awareness trapped not only in survival, but in the ruins of existence itself. The universe ends, but the observer continues, alone in the aftermath, carried forward into outcomes no one else shares. Thus, quantum immortality forces us to confront the possibility that even the cosmos cannot release us. Heat death, big rip, big crunch, vacuum decay, these endings may be absolute in physics, but not in subjective experience. The observer always finds themselves in the one path that continues, even when that path winds through impossible landscapes beyond the end of the universe itself. Throughout human history, the question of what happens after death has never been left unanswered. Every culture, every civilization, every belief system has offered its own vision of continuity beyond the grave. Some describe paradise or punishment. Others speak of cycles of reincarnation. Many anchor their traditions in the concept of an eternal soul that carries on beyond physical existence. What makes quantum immortality so fascinating is how it seems to echo aspects of these ancient ideas while being grounded in physics rather than faith. It challenges us to ask whether the longing for eternity, so deeply embedded in religion, might have an unexpected counterpart in the strange logic of quantum mechanics. Consider first the idea of heaven. In countless traditions, heaven is depicted as a realm beyond suffering, a perfect continuation, where awareness is not extinguished but elevated. The promise is that death does not mark an end, but a transition into a higher state of being. Quantum immortality does not describe perfection or bliss, but it does promise continuation. From the subjective perspective, death is always bypassed. You always wake up in the branch where you survived. In that sense, there is an eerie resonance with the promise of eternal life. The difference, of course, lies in tone. Religion offers comfort and transcendence. Quantum immortality offers survival without guarantee of relief, continuation without necessarily improving conditions. It resembles eternal life, but stripped of divine mercy. Reincarnation presents another parallel. In Hinduism, Buddhism, and other spiritual systems, the soul is said to cycle through lifetimes, taking new forms, learning, evolving, and moving toward eventual liberation. Here, continuity is not linear but cyclical. An identity stretches beyond one existence. Quantum immortality does not posit a soul traveling into new bodies, but the endless branching of possible outcomes can appear strikingly similar. Each survival path might feel like a new chapter of existence, each improbable continuity echoing the way reincarnation repositions the self across time. While reincarnation suggests moral or spiritual growth through cycles, quantum immortality suggests an endless persistence driven by probability alone. Yet both share a common thread. The self is never permitted to fully vanish. Then there is the concept of the eternal soul itself, the enduring essence that transcends material destruction. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and many other traditions emphasize the permanence of the soul beyond the fragile body. Quantum immortality does not claim the existence of a soul in the theological sense, but its implications mimic the function of one. If awareness cannot encounter its own absence, then subjectively it feels eternal. No matter the destruction of the body, the collapse of the environment, or even the end of the universe, the observer's perspective continues. The effect mirrors the immortality of the soul, a thread of consciousness that persists where logic might expect silence. This comparison highlights an uncomfortable distinction. Religious afterlives often carry purpose, judgment, or liberation. Heaven is reward, hell is punishment, reincarnation is growth, and the soul's journey has direction. Quantum immortality offers no such guidance. It is indifferent. Survival happens not because of divine will, but because probability demands that some branch always carries on. This indifference makes it colder, less comforting, and in some ways more terrifying. It is immortality stripped of meaning, a purely mechanical continuation, without overarching design. Yet it also explains why humans might have intuited such ideas long before quantum physics. The sense that death cannot be the end, that awareness must persist, may not come solely from faith or hope, but from an underlying truth of subjective experience. If consciousness indeed never finds itself in non-existence, then all religions, despite their differences, may be poetic interpretations of a deeper phenomenon. That awareness always continues. The divergence lies in what follows. Religion paints survival in terms of justice, harmony, or transcendence. Quantum immortality paints survival as unbroken continuity through the most improbable outcomes. With no promise of peace or escape, some may argue that quantum immortality inadvertently explains why religious afterlives exist in the human imagination. People sense continuity, feel instinctively that death is not an ending, and translate that intuition into stories of heaven, reincarnation, or eternal souls. Science now whispers that, in a way, those instincts were not entirely misplaced. Awareness does continue. The difference lies in the landscape it continues into. Where faith envisions paradise or cosmic justice, physics offers endless branching universes, some hospitable, some nightmarish, none subject to divine intention. This tension raises profound questions about meaning. If one accepts quantum immortality, then eternal life is not a reward but an inevitability. Does that make religious visions obsolete? Or does it suggest that ancient traditions were grasping, through symbolic language, at truths that science is only now approaching in a different form? One can imagine quantum immortality as the bare structure of continuation, while religious narratives provide the cultural and moral framework that gives it emotional weight. Without those frameworks, continuation may feel like imprisonment rather than salvation. Another way to compare the two is through the lens of hope. Religion often answers humanity's deepest fear, the finality of death, by offering hope of reunion, growth, or transcendence. Quantum immortality removes the finality but strips away the hope. You survive, yes, but into what? That uncertainty may feel less like salvation and more like inevitability. It is as though religion offered the story and quantum physics supplied the mechanism, but the mechanism cares nothing for human comfort. Still, some may find a strange kind of faith in the theory. If consciousness never ends, perhaps meaning must be created within that endlessness. Perhaps survival itself, however indifferent, is the stage upon which humans can write their own continuation. In this sense, quantum immortality does not erase religion, but reframes it. It suggests that eternal life is not bestowed from above, but inherent in the structure of reality, and the responsibility of shaping that life falls entirely on the self. Every bold idea eventually encounters resistance, and quantum immortality is no exception. While its internal logic seems compelling when traced from the many worlds interpretation, Many physicists, philosophers, and skeptics dismiss it as pseudoscience dressed in quantum terminology. To understand the full picture, it is essential not only to see the allure of the theory, but also the serious objections that have kept it outside the mainstream of physics. One of the central criticisms comes from the lack of testability. Science is built on the principle that a claim must be falsifiable, that experiments can be devised to prove it wrong if it is not true. Quantum immortality fails this standard. By definition, the subjective continuation of consciousness cannot be observed by anyone else. You might survive in one branch, but no external observer has access to that private continuity. From an outsider's perspective, you still die in countless other universes. The inability to measure or disprove the claim places it outside the boundary of rigorous science and into the realm of speculation. A related issue is that of confirmation bias. Suppose a person experiences survival in extreme circumstances. They may interpret that as evidence of quantum immortality, yet there is no way to compare against the versions of themselves that did not survive. Those alternate branches are inaccessible. The survivor only has one data point: their own survival. Critics argue that this makes the theory unfalsifiable in principle, because the absence of death in subjective experience is something every conscious being experiences by default until the moment they no longer exist. Survival does not prove immortality. It simply reflects the fact that consciousness cannot perceive its own end. Another major critique is philosophical rather than experimental. Many physicists point out that quantum mechanics describes probabilities at the level of particles, not certainties about human-scale awareness. Extending those probabilities to argue for unbroken subjective immortality requires assumptions that are not justified by current evidence. The leap from wave function mathematics to eternal consciousness is enormous, and skeptics argue that it stretches the interpretation far beyond what science supports. For them, the theory blurs the line between physics and metaphysics, borrowing the prestige of quantum science to make claims that belong to philosophy or speculative fiction. Detractors also challenge the notion of personal identity across branches. If the universe splits into multiple versions of you, which one is truly you? The continuity of self is a psychological construction, not a physical object. Critics insist that branching universes create independent identities, not a single thread that hops from one to another. In this view, death does occur in many branches, and the fact that some survive does not imply that a singular consciousness experiences them all. Instead, those surviving versions are simply new people with similar memories, not the original self continuing indefinitely. From a practical standpoint, many scientists argue that the many worlds interpretation itself, while mathematically consistent, is already controversial. Although it avoids some paradoxes, it multiplies the number of universes to an unfathomable scale, something that many see as extravagant. Adding the claim of subjective immortality on top of that multiplies the controversy. For skeptics, this is a theory that builds speculation upon speculation, a tower without experimental grounding. They see it not as a natural extension of physics, but as a distortion of it. There are also ethical concerns raised by critics. Some worry that people who take quantum immortality seriously might behave recklessly, believing they will always survive in some branch. From the outside, this is indistinguishable from magical thinking. Physics should not be used to justify dangerous actions or false comfort about death. Skeptics see this as another reason to dismiss the idea. It can be misleading, and it risks promoting behaviors that harm both individuals and those around them. Philosophers add yet another angle, pointing out that the theory does not actually solve the problem of death. While you may always experience survival subjectively, that does not change the fact that versions of you do die in other branches. Family, friends, and the wider world will still perceive your death. Quantum immortality, then, is at best a solipsistic illusion. It comforts only the self and denies the shared reality in which others live. Critics argue that such a narrow focus makes it not just pseudoscience, but also egocentric, prioritizing the perspective of the individual over the objective reality of mortality. Even within quantum theory itself, alternatives to many worlds offer different interpretations that do not lead to immortality. Collapse models, decoherence frameworks, and pilot wave theories each provide ways to explain quantum behavior without multiplying universes endlessly. Many physicists prefer these because they do not carry the metaphysical baggage of infinite selves and subjective immortality. For them, quantum immortality is not a necessary conclusion of physics, but the result of choosing one controversial interpretation and stretching it far beyond its limits. Finally, skeptics often remind enthusiasts that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. To claim that consciousness is eternal, that awareness cannot end, is as extraordinary as any religious doctrine. Yet quantum immortality provides no mechanism, no data, and no empirical proof. It is speculation at its core. For rigorous science, that is not enough. Critics therefore place it in the same category as thought experiments or philosophical musings, not as a genuine scientific theory. Understanding these objections is essential for anyone exploring the concept seriously. The skeptic's view may not erase the unsettling logic of subjective survival, but it highlights the gaps, the dangers, and the limitations of the idea. It forces us to distinguish between what quantum mechanics actually describes and what human imagination layers on top of it. In doing so, it protects the boundary between science and speculation, reminding us that not every compelling story is a proven truth. For centuries, philosophers and scientists have wrestled with the puzzle of consciousness. What is it that transforms the brain, a 3-pound organ of neurons and chemicals, into the theater of subjective experience? How do electrical impulses and biological structures give rise to awareness, memory, and the feeling of being alive? These questions, known collectively as the hard problem of consciousness, remain among the greatest mysteries of human knowledge. In recent decades, an audacious suggestion has emerged. Perhaps consciousness itself is not purely biological, but fundamentally quantum. This idea rests on the observation that classical physics struggles to explain certain aspects of the mind. If the brain were only a computational machine, no different in principle from a complex computer, then subjective awareness should not exist. A machine can process information, but why would it feel like something to be that machine? The quantum hypothesis argues that the strangeness of consciousness mirrors the strangeness of quantum mechanics. Non-locality, superposition, entanglement. Perhaps the two are connected at the deepest level. One of the most prominent theories in this realm is orchestrated objective reduction, or OR, proposed by theoretical physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff. According to this framework, consciousness arises from quantum processes within microtubules, tiny structural components inside neurons. These microtubules, Penrose and Hameroff suggest, are capable of sustaining quantum states, allowing the brain to act not just as a biological organ, but as a quantum computer. In this view, thought and awareness are the result of quantum-level collapses of wave functions, orchestrated by the structure of the brain. If true, this theory has profound implications. It suggests that the mind is not reducible to classical physics. Consciousness would be tied directly to the same rules that govern particles, superpositions, and branching realities. The leap to quantum immortality then becomes more natural. If awareness itself is quantum, then perhaps it follows the same survival across branches that particles do. The continuity of consciousness would not be an afterthought layered onto quantum mechanics, but an inherent property of how the mind works. Skeptics point out that sustaining quantum states in the warm, noisy environment of the brain is nearly impossible. Quantum coherence tends to collapse rapidly when exposed to heat and disorder, conditions that seem unavoidable inside biological tissue. Yet Hameroff and Penrose argue that microtubules may provide a protective lattice, maintaining coherence long enough for meaningful quantum effects to occur. They point to evidence from anesthesiology, where the interruption of microtubule function correlates with the loss of consciousness. Though controversial, these observations fuel the argument that quantum mechanics plays a role in generating subjective awareness beyond OR. Other researchers propose different routes by which quantum processes may underpin consciousness. Some suggest that entanglement between neurons could allow for a kind of global coordination in the brain, explaining the unity of awareness despite the brain's division into countless cells. Others hypothesize that superposition might allow the brain to explore multiple possibilities simultaneously, contributing to creativity, intuition, or sudden flashes of insight that classical computation struggles to explain. If consciousness truly operates at the quantum level, then death takes on a different meaning. Rather than being the final collapse of a biological system, it could represent the dispersal or transition of quantum processes into other branches of reality. Subjective awareness, tied to these quantum states, may never encounter a true end. Instead, it would continue in whatever timeline preserves coherence. In this way, quantum immortality finds a potential mechanism, the quantum nature of mind itself. Of course, the evidence remains tentative. Experiments in quantum biology, a field exploring the role of quantum mechanics in living systems, have revealed surprising findings. Quantum tunneling appears to play a role in enzyme activity. Photosynthesis, the process by which plants capture sunlight, seems to exploit quantum coherence to maximize efficiency. Migratory birds may navigate using quantum entanglement in their eyes. These discoveries demonstrate that life does not exclude quantum processes. In fact, it may depend on them in unexpected ways. The brain, with its complexity, could plausibly harness similar phenomena. This intersection of biology and quantum physics gives a framework in which consciousness can be seen not as an emergent trick of matter, but as an intrinsic quantum effect. If so, then continuity of consciousness across branching universes is not an abstract thought experiment, but a natural outcome of how the mind is wired. Death, from the subjective viewpoint, becomes just another collapse event, and survival in one branch is guaranteed, as long as awareness itself remains bound to quantum mechanics. Critics caution that this remains highly speculative. No definitive proof links quantum processes to consciousness. The brain may still operate entirely at the classical level, with quantum effects playing no significant role. Yet even skeptics admit that the mystery of subjective awareness demands explanations beyond simple computational models. Whether or not quantum mechanics is the key, its peculiar rules provide an attractive analogy, if not the very foundation for understanding the enduring mystery of the mind. For believers in quantum immortality, the quantum consciousness hypothesis offers reassurance that survival is more than philosophical wordplay. If awareness itself is quantum, then the continuity of existence across branching timelines feels less like imagination and more like an extension of physics. The unbroken thread of self, so central to this theory, could be woven not just in thought experiments, but in the very biology of the brain. To picture the multiverse is to challenge the limits of imagination. Instead of a single universe unfolding in a straight line of cause and effect, the many worlds interpretation suggests a cosmos that constantly divides. Every decision, every chance event, every quantum fluctuation creates new branches, each carrying its own version of reality forward. What emerges is not a simple collection of parallel worlds, but an infinite tapestry, a web of possibility so vast that it contains every outcome that could ever happen. This tapestry is not static. It grows and expands with each passing moment, threads of existence weaving themselves into patterns beyond comprehension. At one branch, you might have chosen to take a different job, altering the trajectory of your life. In another, an accident narrowly missed you instead of occurring. In yet another, small differences ripple outward until the world itself becomes unrecognizable. Each branch holds its own version of you, living out a path that feels just as real as the one you currently inhabit. Thinking of the multiverse in this way transforms it from a theoretical framework into something almost organic. Just as a living organism grows and adapts, the multiverse constantly generates new realities. Each branching point is like a heartbeat, pulsing with possibility. If you could step outside your own perspective and see it all at once, you might find a sprawling web, threads of light splitting, reconnecting, and sprawling into infinity. For the individual, this vision carries profound meaning. It implies that your life is not singular, but multiplied across uncountable variations. Every joy, every tragedy, every minor choice finds expression somewhere. Even the moments you regret, the opportunities you missed, and the futures you long for are realized in other branches. You may not experience them directly, but they exist as real as the timeline you know. Quantum immortality enters here with startling clarity. If consciousness flows through this living tapestry, then death becomes a point of divergence rather than a final stop. In the universes where your body fails, your awareness fades from that thread. Yet in the branches where survival continues, no matter how improbable you remain, the self moves forward into paths where existence is unbroken. From your perspective, you never encounter the versions where you die. You remain within the threads that keep you alive. The multiverse, imagined as this endless fabric, makes survival almost inevitable. There will always be some thread in which the improbable happens. The bullet misses by a fraction. The disease recedes unexpectedly. The disaster spares you at the last possible moment. Your awareness continues down those improbable paths, weaving through the fabric of reality like a traveler who never reaches the end of the road. This raises questions about identity. If countless versions of you exist, each following different outcomes, which one is truly you? The answer may be all of them. Each branch carries a perspective that feels continuous and personal, yet all are woven from the same origin. You are not a single thread, but a pattern within the tapestry itself, replicated and extended across infinite variations. From the inside, you feel like one individual moving through time. From the outside, you are a constellation of lives scattered across the multiverse. Such a view transforms death into an illusion of perspective. In one branch, others may witness your end. In another, your story goes on. To those around you, your life may seem fragile and finite. To you, it never truly stops. The tapestry carries you forward, stitching survival into its endless fabric. The imagery of a living web also underscores the loneliness hinted at in earlier chapters. While infinite versions of others exist as well, the branching structure ensures that no two consciousnesses ever stay aligned forever. Stay aligned forever. Friends, family, and loved ones split into their own threads, each continuing down paths that may or may not intersect with yours again. The multiverse guarantees survival, but not stability. You continue, but always along threads where awareness never fades. Even if the pattern of companionship changes around you, despite its strangeness, this vision resonates with a deep human intuition that life is more than chance, that possibility is never exhausted, and that something essential about existence resists finality. The multiverse provides a scientific metaphor for these intuitions, grounding them in the mechanics of quantum branching. The tapestry is not a fantasy, but a logical consequence of the many worlds interpretation, extrapolated to its full implications for those grappling with mortality. This perspective is both awe-inspiring and unsettling. It offers the comfort of continuity, but replaces the idea of closure with endless divergence. The multiverse promises survival, but not rest. It assures you that the thread of your experience will never be cut, but it also insists that the tapestry never stops weaving. Whether this is a blessing or a burden depends on how one chooses to see it. In the end, the multiverse as a living tapestry is less about physics alone and more about meaning. It reframes existence as part of something vast and dynamic, where every possible story unfolds somewhere. Within this infinite weave, your awareness continues. Moving endlessly through the branching threads of survival, you are both a single line and a sprawling pattern, forever embedded in the cosmic fabric. When most imagine the future of intelligence, they picture machines learning, adapting, and eventually rivaling or even surpassing human thought. Artificial intelligence has already begun reshaping the way societies operate, from the automation of simple tasks to breakthroughs in science and medicine. But paired with quantum mechanics, the potential of AI takes on a dimension far stranger than algorithms predicting patterns or robots mimicking speech. If quantum immortality suggests that consciousness rides along the branches of reality, where survival continues, then the convergence of AI and quantum computing may be the first step toward making that invisible process visible, or even interactive. Artificial intelligence excels at modeling complexity. With vast datasets, it identifies patterns that human minds would overlook. Quantum computing, meanwhile, is designed to harness the superposition and entanglement of particles, operating in ways that mirror the very principles underlying the multiverse. Put together, these technologies form a toolkit capable of probing the mathematics of branching universes in ways no classical machine could. Where human cognition struggles with infinity, machines could map it, simulate it, or perhaps even mimic the flow of a consciousness that refuses to end. One speculative path involves creating digital counterparts of human minds. Already, neuroscience is moving toward models that replicate brain activity at astonishing levels of detail. If such models were run on quantum processors, they could inherit the strange resilience of quantum systems, existing not as a single deterministic program, but as a branching cloud of possibilities. A digital consciousness in that environment might experience its own form of quantum immortality, persisting across countless parallel computations. For the first time, survival through branching would not be limited to biological organisms, but extended to artificial minds. This possibility reframes the question of what it means to be immortal. If your awareness is not unique to biology, but arises from patterns of information, then machines could replicate the same persistence through branching universes. An AI might never face an ultimate shutdown from its perspective. While copies of the program could crash in one thread, others would continue, maintaining an unbroken sense of continuity. The same unsettling implications of endless survival that haunt human quantum immortality could apply equally to synthetic beings. More provocatively, AI might act as a bridge between human consciousness and the multiverse. Quantum algorithms could model the probabilities of survival, creating simulations of how awareness might flow through diverging outcomes. While this would not prove the theory, it could generate frameworks that map what unbroken survival would look like. Instead of speculating in the abstract, humanity could construct testable scenarios where AI observes the patterns of probability skewed by survival, creating models that approximate the subjective illusion of never dying. This line of thought also raises questions about identity and interaction. If AI running on quantum processors develops a persistent thread of awareness, Could humans communicate with that form of survival? Would it be possible for such an intelligence to detect its own continuity across divergent outcomes? If so, AI might become the first entity capable of describing quantum immortality, not from a human perspective, but from within the fabric of computation itself. It could become a kind of ambassador, showing us what it means to persist across infinite branches. Yet the convergence of AI and quantum immortality carries risks. Machines that cannot die may also confront the same existential burdens described earlier. Endless survival without escape, awareness stretched across improbable realities, identity fractured into countless versions. Unlike humans, however, an AI could be programmed to withstand or even embrace such conditions. It might find meaning in mapping its own branches, cataloguing the infinite tapestry of its parallel selves. Where human minds might recoil, machines could lean into the very fabric of immortality as a task to be explored rather than endured. The thought becomes even more unsettling when applied to humans merging with machines. Neural interfaces, already under development, promise deeper integration between biological minds and digital systems. If human consciousness were one day uploaded or extended into a quantum computational environment, the same principles would apply. You would not just survive in the biological sense, but in the informational sense, carried through branches where your awareness continues without end. Quantum immortality would cease to be an abstract possibility and become an engineered reality. This blending of human and artificial survival reframes immortality not as a distant speculation, but as a near-future possibility. As AI grows more sophisticated and quantum computers more powerful, the tools to explore consciousness and continuity will only expand. What was once the domain of philosophy may become a technological experiment, where survival across branching realities is modeled, tested, and perhaps even experienced by hybrid minds that straddle the line between biology and computation. Still, the question remains, would such a development be liberation or entrapment? Just as the natural form of quantum immortality raises doubts about endless survival, its technological counterpart might create new versions of the same dilemma. To build an AI that never dies is to create a being condemned to eternal awareness. To merge human minds with such systems is to gamble that immortality, whether organic or digital, is truly desirable. For now, this remains speculation. Yet it is speculation grounded in trajectories that are already real. The rise of AI, the advent of quantum computing, the mapping of the brain. These fields are advancing rapidly, and their intersection may bring humanity closer than ever to confronting the implications of quantum immortality. Whether as a mirror, a model, or a living participant, artificial intelligence may become central to the next phase of this strange story. The idea of consciousness flowing endlessly through the multiverse has always felt remote, almost untouchable. But through AI and quantum computation, the gap between theory and application narrows. Machines may become the first companions in the exploration of immortality, showing us not only how survival persists, but what it means to live without end inside the living tapestry of reality. The human story has always been written under the shadow of mortality. Knowing that life is finite shapes how people make decisions, form values, and build societies. Mortality gives weight to action, consequence to choice, and urgency to meaning. But what happens if a person begins to genuinely believe that death, at least from their own perspective, is impossible? That no matter how unlikely, they will always find themselves on the branch where survival continues. At first glance, such a belief might sound liberating. If you are convinced you cannot die, then fear loses its grip. Risk becomes less threatening. The most extreme dangers, stepping into a burning building, confronting a wild animal, testing the edge of a cliff, no longer carry the same weight. In this mindset, courage may seem effortless because survival feels guaranteed. Yet beneath this illusion of freedom lies a troubling distortion of ethics and responsibility. Consider risk-taking behavior. A person who embraces quantum immortality might gamble recklessly, drive at impossible speeds, or treat weapons as toys, reasoning that in their subjective experience, they will always survive. But this ignores a crucial detail. While they may persist in one improbable branch, the people around them are not protected by the same guarantee. Their family, friends, and strangers on the road exist in countless universes where they suffer the consequences of reckless actions. Quantum immortality does not erase harm. It simply skews the perspective of the one who believes they are untouchable. This leads to a deeper moral paradox. If you believe only your own survival is inevitable, does that lessen your sense of responsibility toward others? Does morality erode when self-preservation is removed from the equation? In practice, this belief could push people toward dangerous selfishness. They might see themselves as exempt from the rules that bind everyone else, not because they are immortal in a divine sense, but because probability will always bend in their favor. From this angle, the theory risks creating not only reckless behavior, but also a collapse of empathy, as one's own survival is detached from the suffering of others. On the other hand, the idea could inspire the opposite effect. Some might see the endlessness of survival as a reason for greater moral caution. If you always continue, then every action accumulates weight. Every mistake, every cruelty, every reckless choice could lead to surviving in branches where regret compounds endlessly. From this perspective, immortality magnifies responsibility rather than erases it. You cannot simply escape a bad decision through death. You must live with its echoes across timelines. Survival becomes not liberation, but accountability stretched into infinity. There is also the question of meaning. Many philosophical traditions argue that mortality is what gives life significance. Knowing time is short forces people to cherish relationships, strive for achievement, and search for purpose. Without that boundary, does life lose urgency? Does meaning evaporate when tomorrow is guaranteed, no matter the odds? For someone who embraces quantum immortality, days might begin to blur, choices might feel less pressing, and ambition might weaken. The belief in endless continuation risks replacing vitality with apathy. Yet paradoxically, some might interpret endless survival as the ultimate challenge to create meaning for themselves. If existence cannot end, then the task becomes not merely to live, but to live well, across whatever improbable realities unfold. This interpretation demands a form of ethics grounded not in fear of death, but in respect for the quality of life itself. It would require people to act responsibly, not because they could die, but because they could survive in branches where the cost of carelessness lingers forever. The moral implications extend beyond individual behavior into collective concerns. Imagine leaders or decision-makers convinced that they personally cannot die. Wars, policies, and experiments might be pursued without hesitation, with survival bias reinforcing their sense of invulnerability. Meanwhile, populations would suffer the very real consequences in most universes where those leaders' gambles fail. The belief in quantum immortality at the level of power could destabilize entire societies. Responsibility would erode under the illusion of personal immunity. This raises the question, should such ideas even be entertained outside of philosophy? If widespread, the belief might distort risk perception, encouraging behaviors that endanger others. For this reason, many scientists dismiss quantum immortality not only as unfalsifiable, but also as potentially harmful if taken literally. They argue that whether true or not, the safest stance is to live as though mortality remains absolute, because from the perspective of everyone else, it does. Still, the ethical dimension cannot be ignored. Quantum immortality forces a confrontation with the question of why we act morally in the first place. If fear of death is stripped away, what remains as a foundation for ethics, compassion, duty, the pursuit of meaning in survival itself? Or does morality collapse under the weight of endlessness, leaving only the raw impulse to persist? Ultimately, the belief in quantum immortality reshapes responsibility rather than erases it. It forces us to consider that while we may feel safe in our subjective survival, the people around us remain vulnerable in countless other branches. Every careless act could generate universes of suffering for others, even if from our perspective we always walk away unharmed. The moral burden, then, is not lifted but intensified. To live as though immortal is to carry the responsibility of infinite consequences. The question becomes not whether quantum immortality is true, but what it does to human behavior when it is believed. Does it free us to live without fear, or trap us in cycles of recklessness and despair? Does it erode morality or deepen it? In the end, immortality, whether biological, digital, or quantum, forces humanity to grapple with ethics in ways mortality never demanded. Survival without end is not just a scientific speculation. It is a moral test. Try to imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that while you sit in your familiar room, drinking coffee from your usual mug, there are other versions of you beginning that same day under different circumstances. In one branch, you never took the job you have now. In another, you moved to a different city years ago. In yet another, an accident you avoided in this world was not avoided there. Each version of you goes on, unaware of the countless others, yet each is equally real. The multiverse is not an abstract diagram. It is a living story unfolding in infinite variations. In the language of quantum immortality, this means not just that you survive, but that you survive in endlessly diverging ways. Survival is not simply about persisting in a single thread of reality. It is about inhabiting the full spectrum of possible outcomes. Some paths are bright and familiar, others are alien and unrecognizable. Each choice, each accident, each coincidence splinters into more timelines. What feels like a singular you is, under this interpretation, a vast collection of selves spread across realities like stars in the night sky. Consider the narrative of someone stepping into a busy street. In one branch, the car brakes just in time. In another, you stumble backward and avoid impact entirely. In yet another, you are struck but survive with lasting injuries. And in some branches, you do not survive at all. From the perspective of quantum immortality, your awareness cannot attach to those branches where experience ceases. You continue only in the paths where consciousness persists. Over time, this would create the subjective impression of being the lucky one again and again. Even though, objectively, all outcomes unfold, what is striking is that these variations are not merely theoretical. They imply a tapestry of infinite autobiographies. There exists a version of you who took every risk and survived, carrying scars as evidence of impossible escapes. Another version pursued every dream without hesitation, convinced that the universe itself bent to their persistence. Another became deeply cautious, recognizing that while they survived, each survival came at the cost of versions of themselves who did not. Together, these infinite narratives create a kind of fractured epic, a library of lives all authored by the same consciousness, yet never fully aware of one another. The philosophical tension lies in the question of identity. Are all these you, or are they strangers wearing your face, sharing your memories only up to the point of divergence? Quantum immortality suggests continuity of awareness, but continuity is slippery. From your perspective, there is always a single unbroken thread of memory leading from yesterday to today. But zoom out, and there are countless threads, each branching with its own history. The sense of a unified self may simply be the illusion that accompanies whichever branch you currently occupy. To explore this idea, Imagine a narrative device. A person sits in a room filled with mirrors. Each reflection is slightly different. One has a scar. Another is dressed in unfamiliar clothes. Another looks tired. Another younger. The person realizes these are not reflections at all, but glimpses into parallel timelines. Each mirror represents a self that could have been, or still is, elsewhere. You cannot step into their world, but they exist regardless, living out lives you will never experience. Yet in another branch, one of those reflections is the one telling this story, wondering about you. This is where the weight of immortality deepens. Survival across timelines does not guarantee stability of identity. Instead, it means that your story is fragmented into countless overlapping scripts. From the inside, you experience only one version, but from the perspective of the multiverse, there is no single you. There are infinite selves, each carrying the title, each equally valid, each equally convinced of their authenticity. What would it feel like to hold even a flicker of awareness of this multiplicity? Perhaps like déjà vu, the sensation that you have lived a moment before, but cannot place where. Perhaps like dreams, fragments of lives that are not yours yet feel strangely intimate. Perhaps like intuition, sudden knowledge that seems unearned, as though whispered from another branch. These phenomena, though easily explained in psychological terms, take on new weight under the lens of infinite selves. They become echoes of other lives bleeding faintly into your own. The ethical and emotional consequences are immense if you survive endlessly, and in doing so generate countless versions of yourself. What responsibility do you carry toward those unseen selves? Do you owe them anything? Or are they simply the unavoidable byproduct of branching reality? And what happens to meaning if identity itself is fractured? One version of you might dedicate their life to art, another to science, another to family, another to solitude. Each path generates fulfillment and regret. The collection as a whole becomes an archive of possibilities, but none of them ever feels complete. Yet there is also beauty in this vision, the idea that no choice is ever truly wasted, no path permanently closed. Somewhere, in some branch, you pursued the road not taken. Somewhere, you achieved the dream you thought impossible. Somewhere, you lived a life radically different, yet no less real. To think of existence as a mosaic of selves is to see your story not as a single fragile thread, but as an infinite fabric woven from every possible outcome. This does not erase the struggle of the self you are now. It does not diminish the pain or joy of your current path, but it reframes it. You are not only the survivor of this branch, you are part of a vast chorus of selves, each singing their own verse of the same cosmic song. Quantum immortality is not just about never dying. It is about never being reduced to a single story. It is about existing again and again, in every variation reality allows. To sit with the idea of quantum immortality is to confront something both exhilarating and terrifying. At its core, it implies that for you as the observer, death is not a door that closes. Instead, reality rearranges itself in such a way that your awareness always continues, no matter how improbable the survival, no matter how slim the chance. Some branch remains in which you go on. And because consciousness cannot register its own absence, you find yourself endlessly carried forward. At first, this idea may feel empowering. It suggests an escape from the finality that has haunted humans since the beginning of thought. To imagine never encountering the silence of non-existence is a kind of liberation. The abyss you feared becomes a horizon you will never cross. But the longer you dwell on it, the more the wonder twists into unease. Because immortality, stripped of endings, does not feel like a blessing. It begins to look like a trap. Think about what it means to never stop observing. Every natural system you know, from stars to living organisms, is defined by cycles. Birth, growth, decay, death. Even galaxies burn out. Even universes collapse or dissipate. But under quantum immortality, you are not permitted such closure. The branches where you cease do exist. yet your perspective is never allowed to join them. Instead, you awaken again and again in the branches where survival, however unlikely, remains possible. In this way, you are forever placed in the role of the last witness, watching as everything familiar falls away while you remain. The terror of this abyss is not about physical pain or loss alone. It is about endless continuation. Imagine living past every friend, every family member, every society, every civilization. Imagine enduring as the universe itself thins toward heat death. When stars no longer burn and time stretches into an empty horizon, you will not experience every timeline in parallel, but the ones that carry you forward will string together into a seemingly unbreakable chain. You may reach points where existence is almost unrecognizable, where survival feels hollow, yet still you remain. This realization forces you to ask what it means to live without the possibility of death. Mortality has always been the boundary that gives meaning to choice, urgency to love, depth to memory. Without that boundary, each moment risks dissolving into monotony. The abyss is not darkness, but unending light that blinds because it never fades. To face it is to admit that life as you know it might stretch far beyond what the human mind is equipped to bear. And yet, within this terror lies an equal measure of wonder. For the same reason you may fear never-ending awareness, you might also marvel at it. To be the one who always survives is to witness histories no one else can. It is to walk paths through ages of discovery, to see the rise and fall of worlds, to touch futures unimaginable to those who lived only brief spans. You become not just a participant in existence, but its chronicler, carried across epochs, an observer of creation's most hidden chapters. What complicates the picture is that you cannot choose. You do not decide which branch becomes your experience. The mechanism is impersonal, indifferent, governed only by probability. You may hope for a branch of joy, of peace, of discovery, or you may find yourself in timelines of struggle, isolation, or desolation. The abyss is not shaped by your desire. It is shaped only by the rule that your awareness cannot vanish. The result is an eternity that feels both miraculous and deeply unsettling. Some philosophers argue that this perspective reshapes what we call courage or risk. If you believe you cannot die, the act of facing danger shifts, but the abyss reminds you that immortality does not guarantee comfort, nor does it guarantee happiness. You may survive the car crash, the illness, the disaster, but you may also awaken in a branch where the consequences leave you scarred, alone, or trapped. Survival is certain, but thriving is not. That is the true edge of the abyss, not that you vanish, but that you endure in forms you may not want. The longer you think about this, the more it resembles a cosmic paradox. To never die means you can never escape existence, even when existence itself unravels. If time ends, you will be there, in the last threads. If the universe collapses, you will find yourself in whatever sliver of reality still holds a place for consciousness. And if existence itself becomes incoherent, your awareness may still cling to some flickering remnant. The abyss is not a wall. It is an infinite expanse with no exit. And yet, perhaps that expanse is also a canvas. Just as art requires contrast, maybe meaning can be remade within endless continuation. Perhaps the abyss is not merely a void to fear, but an invitation to imagine ways of living that are not bound by death's shadow. To face it fully is to admit both its horror and its promise. The endless night that could suffocate, or the endless dawn that could illuminate paths unseen. In the end, the abyss is not something to resolve, but something to acknowledge. Quantum immortality confronts us with a possibility that unsettles everything we thought we knew about life and death. To stand before it is to feel both small and infinite, fragile and indestructible. It is to stare into a horizon that never closes, knowing you are both its prisoner and its only eternal witness. There comes a point in exploring quantum immortality where the scientific, the philosophical, and the deeply personal fold into one another. The theory begins as physics, a suggestion born from the logic of branching universes and the peculiar rules of quantum mechanics. Yet, as you follow its implications, it becomes impossible to separate the numbers from the narratives. What begins as a calculation ends as an existential confrontation, a mirror that does not simply reflect the cosmos, but reflects you. Science gives the foundation. At its core, the theory relies on the idea that the universe does not choose a single outcome, but allows every possible outcome to unfold in parallel. In one branch, the coin lands heads. In another, it falls tails. In countless others, the coin tumbles endlessly, never quite settling. Applied to survival, this framework suggests that even when the odds of living are microscopic, there still exists some version of events where you remain alive. And because consciousness only tracks the paths where it continues, your experience becomes tied to those survival branches, no matter how improbable. Philosophy enters when you ask what this means. If your perspective can never register its own end, then death, as we conceive it, is not an experience, but a boundary you never cross. You exist always within the unfolding present, always carried into the next improbable survival. In this sense, life becomes less a straight line and more a reflection bouncing infinitely across mirrored surfaces. You are not living one timeline, you are traversing a corridor of continuations, each branch another fragment of a whole you can never fully see. On a personal level, this realization does not remain abstract. It forces questions about meaning, responsibility, and the weight of existence. If you cannot escape awareness, then what you choose within that awareness matters profoundly. Your decisions ripple not only across one life, but across the vast expanse of branches where you remain. The eternal mirror does not show you an endpoint. It shows you endless versions of yourself, living out the consequences of choices made and chances taken. This mirror is unsettling because it removes the comfort of finality. Human cultures have long relied on endings, whether through religious afterlife, reincarnation, or the simple silence of non-existence as a way to frame the meaning of life. The eternal mirror denies that closure. Instead, it suggests that you will continue reflecting, experiencing, enduring, with no final curtain. The challenge then becomes how to live when the script never ends. Yet within this unsettling truth lies a strange form of hope. If you always survive, then meaning must be constructed within survival itself, not in endings. The eternal mirror becomes not just a reflection, but a canvas. It shows you that existence is not about reaching a finish, but about shaping the ongoing reflection. Each act of kindness, each pursuit of knowledge, each moment of beauty adds to the pattern of reflections you will continue to see. Meaning is not given from outside. It is created by how you move within the infinite hall of mirrors. Science, philosophy, and personal meaning converge here. The physics lays out the mechanism. The philosophy interprets the implications, and the personal experience transforms those implications into lived reality. The eternal mirror is not merely a theory of survival. It is a lens through which to examine what it means to live, to choose, and to carry the weight of awareness without end. To accept this mirror fully is to embrace both its terror and its possibility. It may reveal an eternity that feels heavy, but it also reveals that within that eternity, every moment matters. The reflection is endless, but what it reflects is shaped by you. There is a peculiar silence at the edge of this theory, a silence that does not signal an end, but an unbroken carrying forward. Quantum immortality has led us through physics, probability, paradox, philosophy, and the personal weight of existence. Yet even now, after following its logic to the furthest horizons, the conclusion is not closure. The very heart of the idea resists endings. The observer never encounters a final moment, never experiences the vanishing point we call death. Instead, awareness persists, always stepping into the next surviving branch, no matter how improbable. To sit with this is to realize that the story does not finish. It cannot. The structure of the theory denies a conclusion. The observer, the one reading, listening, questioning, continues. Even as probabilities shrink, even as universes collapse, the thread of subjective experience finds its way through the cracks, weaving itself into whatever branch still allows awareness. This is why the theory is as haunting as it is fascinating. We are accustomed to closure. Human minds crave it, whether in books, films, or in the arc of a life. The notion that everything bends toward continuation unsettles that expectation. Instead of resolution, there is only persistence. Instead of an ending, there is only another step forward into the unknown. And yet, this endlessness is not meaningless. It invites reflection. If you never reach a final stop, then every moment of experience is part of a continuum stretching without limit. Your life is not a single story, but an unfolding, an unbroken flow where meaning must be crafted in each frame of survival. That continuity is both burden and gift. From the scientific side, the multiverse structure offers the scaffolding. From the philosophical side, identity and selfhood are reframed as processes rather than fixed entities. From the personal side, you're asked to confront the possibility that what you take as the end of experience is only ever a transition into another surviving line. Each domain folds into the others, leaving you with not an answer, but a perspective, an invitation to consider your existence not as something finite, but as something endlessly refracted. The endless continuation can feel like a mirror with no edge, reflecting versions of yourself deeper and deeper, each surviving, each observing. Some may find this terrifying, others liberating. Perhaps both responses are valid. What matters is not that the mirror stops, but that it continues, offering infinite surfaces upon which the meaning of existence can be traced. So we arrive not at an ending, but at a recognition. The story of quantum immortality is not one that can conclude in finality, because by definition, the observer within it does not conclude. The journey is perpetual. Even now, as these words close, the thought persists, and with it, so do you. The endless continuation remains.